The origins of Hephaestus present one of the most complex and contradictory narratives within Greek mythology, reflecting the evolution of religious thought across different periods and regions of the ancient world. Unlike many Olympian deities whose birth stories remain relatively consistent across sources, Hephaestus emerges from a web of conflicting accounts that reveal deep theological tensions about divine perfection, parental authority, and the nature of creative power itself. The primary divergence in Hephaestus's birth narrative centers on the fundamental question of paternity. The earliest and most widely attested version, found in Hesiod's Theogony and later echoed by numerous classical sources, presents Hephaestus as the product of Hera's parthenogenetic creation, born from the queen of the gods alone, without male contribution. This account positions his birth as a direct response to Zeus's own act of parthenogenesis, when Athena emerged fully formed from his head. Hera, according to this tradition, conceived and bore Hephaestus through her divine will alone, motivated by jealousy and the desire to demonstrate that she too possessed the power of independent creation. This parthenogenetic origin carries profound theological implications that extend beyond simple divine rivalry. In ancient Greek religious thought, the ability to create life independently represented the ultimate expression of divine authority and self-sufficiency. By bearing Hephaestus without Zeus, Hera asserted her fundamental equality with her husband and challenged the patriarchal hierarchy that Zeus sought to establish on Olympus. The act simultaneously represented both maternal devotion and divine rebellion, themes that would resonate throughout Hephaestus's subsequent mythology. However, an alternative tradition preserved in various later sources, including certain versions found in Apollodorus and referenced in scattered scholia, presents Zeus and Hera as joint parents of Hephaestus. This version attempts to normalize his birth within conventional divine genealogy, suggesting that the more radical parthenogenetic account emerged from specific theological or political motivations. The dual-parent narrative aligns more closely with traditional family structures and reduces the revolutionary implications of Hera's independent creation, possibly reflecting later attempts to harmonize conflicting religious traditions or to diminish the subversive elements of the original myth. These competing birth narratives reflect broader tensions within Greek religious thought between different theological traditions. The parthenogenetic version likely preserves elements of earlier matriarchal religious systems where female deities possessed independent creative powers. The dual-parent alternative may represent later patriarchal revisions designed to subordinate female divine authority to male dominance. Regional variations in worship practices and local theological emphases would have further contributed to the persistence of both traditions, creating a mythological landscape where multiple versions coexisted without resolution. The traumatic expulsion from Olympus represents perhaps the most psychologically complex episode in Hephaestus's early mythology, with two distinct versions that emphasize different aspects of divine family dysfunction. The first account describes his rejection as an infant by Hera herself, who discovered his physical deformity immediately after birth. According to this version, Hera's reaction to her son's lameness was one of immediate revulsion and shame. The goddess, who prized physical perfection and divine beauty above all other qualities, could not tolerate the presence of a deformed child among the perfect inhabitants of Olympus. The infant's lameness presented an insurmountable problem for Hera's conception of divine dignity. In Greek religious thought, physical perfection served as an external manifestation of divine nature, the gods' superior beauty reflecting their superior power and moral authority. A lame god contradicted fundamental assumptions about divine nature and threatened the entire theological system that equated physical perfection with spiritual superiority. Hera's rejection, while seemingly cruel, operated according to the internal logic of Greek divine hierarchy, where imperfection could not be tolerated among the perfect inhabitants of the celestial realm. The mechanics of this first expulsion involved Hera literally hurling the infant from the heights of Olympus, sending him plummeting through the celestial sphere toward the mortal world below. The violence of this act underscores the absolute nature of divine rejection. No gradual exile or gentle removal, but an immediate and brutal casting out that emphasized the irreversible nature of his banishment. The fall itself lasted an entire day, during which the infant Hephaestus tumbled helplessly through space, his divine nature preventing death but not sparing him the trauma of abandonment and physical injury. The alternative version of his expulsion presents an entirely different scenario, occurring during Hephaestus's adolescence rather than infancy. This account places the traumatic event within the context of a violent domestic dispute between Zeus and Hera, with the young god attempting to defend his mother against his father's wrath. The specific cause of the parental conflict varies among sources, but most commonly involves Zeus's numerous extramarital affairs and Hera's resulting fury. When Zeus raised his hand against Hera during one particularly violent confrontation, Hephaestus intervened physically, grasping his father's arm to prevent the blow. Zeus's reaction to his son's interference was swift and merciless. The king of the gods seized Hephaestus by the ankle and hurled him from Olympus with such force that the young deity's trajectory carried him far beyond the boundaries of the divine realm. This version emphasizes Zeus's absolute authority within the divine household and his intolerance of any challenge to his patriarchal dominance, even from his own children. The specific detail of grasping the ankle may explain or reinforce Hephaestus's lameness, suggesting that Zeus's violent grip caused permanent damage to his son's leg. The psychological implications of this adolescent expulsion differ significantly from the infant rejection narrative. Rather than being cast out due to physical imperfection, Hephaestus suffered banishment as punishment for moral courage, his willingness to protect his mother from domestic violence. This version transforms him from a victim of aesthetic prejudice into a hero of filial loyalty, creating a more complex character whose suffering stems from virtue rather than deformity. The injustice of his punishment adds layers of resentment and justified anger that would influence his later relationships with both parents. Both expulsion narratives converge on the fundamental theme of divine rejection and the traumatic separation of child from family. Whether cast out as an imperfect infant or banished as a protective adolescent, Hephaestus experienced the ultimate abandonment, rejection not merely by individual parents but by the entire divine community that constituted his natural social environment. This rejection would profoundly shape his character, creating the psychological foundation for his later roles as both benefactor and antagonist to his divine family. The intersection of physical disability with supreme craftsmanship presents one of the most fascinating paradoxes in Greek mythology, challenging conventional assumptions about the relationship between bodily perfection and divine capability. Hephaestus's lameness, described in various sources as affecting one or both legs, created a visible contradiction to standard divine appearance, while simultaneously enabling his unparalleled mastery of metallurgy and craftsmanship. This paradox reflects complex Greek attitudes toward disability, labour, and the nature of excellence itself. Greek religious thought typically associated physical beauty with divine favour and moral superiority, creating a theological system where external appearance reflected internal worth. The gods' perfect beauty served as both symbol and proof of their elevated nature, distinguishing them from imperfect mortals and reinforcing the hierarchy that placed divine beings above human ones. Within this framework, Hephaestus's lameness represented a profound anomaly that threatened basic assumptions about divine nature and the relationship between form and function. However, his physical imperfection coincided with, and perhaps enabled, his extraordinary creative abilities. The god's lameness forced him to develop alternative means of mobility and manipulation, leading to innovations in tool use and mechanical assistance that enhanced rather than limited his capabilities. His physical limitations became the catalyst for technological advancement, transforming apparent weakness into unprecedented strength. The forge became his domain not despite his lameness, but because of it, as his unique physical challenges drove him to develop solutions that transcended conventional limitations. This relationship between disability and excellence reflects deeper Greek philosophical concepts about the nature of compensation and specialization. The idea that individuals might develop extraordinary abilities in one area to compensate for deficiencies in another appears throughout Greek thought, from the blind prophet Tiresias, whose loss of sight enhanced his spiritual vision, to the concept of divine justice that balanced advantages and disadvantages across different domains of experience. Hephaestus embodied this principle on a divine scale, demonstrating that even among the gods, perfection might manifest through apparent imperfection. The rescue and nurturing by Thetis and Eurynome in the ocean depths represents a crucial formative period that transformed Hephaestus from a rejected outcast into the master craftsman of Olympus. These two sea goddesses, daughters of the ancient titan Oceanus, discovered the fallen god in the depths of the Mediterranean and provided him with both physical sanctuary and emotional healing during 9 critical years of his development. Their underwater realm offered perfect isolation from the divine politics of Olympus, while providing abundant resources for his emerging artistic interests. Thetis, later to become the mother of Achilles, possessed both the wisdom and strength necessary to nurture a traumatized divine child. Her experience with transformation and adaptation, she was renowned for her shape-shifting abilities, made her particularly suited to help Hephaestus adjust to his physical limitations and discover alternative paths to power and recognition. Eurynome, known for her grace and beauty, provided complementary nurturing focused on aesthetic development and artistic refinement. Together, these goddesses created an environment where Hephaestus could heal from his traumatic rejection while developing the skills that would define his future identity. The underwater environment itself proved ideally suited to metallurgical experimentation. The ocean depths provided both the isolation necessary for concentrated work and access to unique materials and techniques unavailable on land or in the heavens. Volcanic vents on the ocean floor offered natural forges where the young god could experiment with extreme temperatures and exotic metals. The pressure of the deep waters enabled techniques impossible at surface level, while the constant flow of currents provided natural cooling and tempering systems for his early works. During these 9 formative years, Hephaestus created his first masterpieces, jewelry, decorative objects, and small tools that demonstrated his rapidly developing mastery of metalworking techniques. The sea goddesses served as both his first customers and his most encouraging critics, commissioning pieces that challenged his growing abilities while providing the positive reinforcement necessary for continued development. Their appreciation for his work helped rebuild the self-confidence shattered by his violent rejection from Olympus, gradually transforming his identity from that of unwanted outcast to valued artisan. The gifts he created for Thetis and Eurynome during this period established patterns that would characterize his later work, objects of extraordinary beauty and functionality that demonstrated both technical mastery and deep emotional investment. These early pieces, crafted with gratitude and affection for his rescuers, revealed his capacity to infuse mechanical creation with genuine feeling, a quality that would distinguish his craftsmanship from mere technical proficiency. The emotional resonance of his work stemmed directly from this period of nurturing acceptance, when his creative abilities first received recognition and appreciation. The isolation of the ocean depths also allowed Hephaestus to develop his unique approach to problem-solving and innovation without external pressure or criticism. Free from the perfectionist expectations of Olympian society, he could experiment with unconventional techniques and embrace failure as part of the learning process. This freedom to explore and make mistakes proved crucial to his artistic development, enabling him to push beyond traditional boundaries and develop the revolutionary techniques that would later astonish both gods and mortals. The transformation from grateful protégé to vengeful mastermind occurred gradually during Hephaestus's final years beneath the waves. As his skills reached unprecedented heights and his confidence solidified, the memory of his violent expulsion from Olympus evolved from a source of shame into fuel for calculated retribution. The sea goddesses who had nurtured him began to notice subtle changes in his demeanour. Longer periods of brooding silence, more intense focus on his work, and an increasing tendency to craft objects whose beauty concealed hidden mechanisms and secret functions. The conception of his revenge against Hera represented the culmination of years of accumulated resentment and technical innovation. Unlike the impulsive acts of violence that characterized many divine conflicts, Hephaestus planned his retaliation with the methodical precision of a master craftsman. His target would not be Hera's physical form. Such direct assault would violate fundamental divine protocols and likely result in his permanent exile from the cosmic order. Instead, he would strike at something far more precious to the Queen of the Gods: her dignity, her authority, and her ability to maintain face before the assembled Olympians. The Golden Throne emerged from this calculated planning as perhaps the most sophisticated trap ever conceived by divine intelligence. Hephaestus began its construction during his 8th year in the ocean depths, working in absolute secrecy and employing techniques that pushed the boundaries of even divine metallurgy. The base material consisted of gold so pure that it seemed to generate its own internal light, harvested from veins deep within underwater volcanic formations where the metal had been refined by geological processes spanning millennia. This gold possessed properties unknown to surface dwellers: malleability that responded to divine will, while maintaining structural integrity that could withstand the immense forces generated by struggling immortal beings. The throne's visible design embodied everything Hera valued most: classical proportions that exemplified divine aesthetic perfection, intricate decorative elements that demonstrated supreme craftsmanship, and an overall presence that commanded immediate respect and admiration. The seat rose from a rectangular base supported by 4 legs carved to resemble intertwined serpents, their scales individually detailed and their eyes set with gems that seemed to follow observers with unsettling intelligence. The backrest curved gracefully upward, its surface adorned with relief carvings depicting scenes of Hera's greatest triumphs, her marriage to Zeus, her role in various divine councils, her dominion over marriage and family life. However, beneath this magnificent exterior lay a network of hidden mechanisms that represented the pinnacle of Hephaestus's engineering genius. The throne's primary trap consisted of invisible restraints woven from threads of divine metal so fine they could not be detected by sight or touch until activated. These restraints lay dormant within the throne's structure, integrated so seamlessly with the decorative elements that even careful examination revealed nothing suspicious. The activation mechanism responded specifically to the unique divine essence of Hera herself. Only when she sat upon the throne would her immortal energy trigger the hidden bindings. The restraints operated through a combination of physical and metaphysical principles that exploited fundamental aspects of divine nature. Once activated, they drew power directly from their victim's own immortal essence, growing stronger as the trapped deity struggled to escape. The harder Hera fought against the bonds, the more tightly they would constrict, creating a feedback loop that made liberation through brute force impossible. The restraints targeted not only her physical form but also her divine abilities. Her power to transform, to teleport, to call upon her divine authority would all be neutralized while she remained trapped. The throne's secondary mechanisms served to amplify the humiliation of Hera's predicament. Hidden speakers throughout the structure would broadcast her struggles to every corner of Olympus, ensuring that her undignified position became public knowledge. Magical mirrors concealed within the decorative elements would project images of her trapped form to any location Hephaestus chose, allowing him to display his mother's helplessness to audiences across the divine realm. These features transformed a simple trap into a comprehensive assault on Hera's most precious possession, her reputation for invincible authority. The symbolic dimensions of the Golden Throne extended far beyond its function as a revenge mechanism. In Greek divine culture, thrones represented the ultimate expression of legitimate authority and recognized power. The right to sit while others stood marked the fundamental distinction between ruler and subject, between those who commanded and those who obeyed. By creating a throne that trapped rather than elevated its occupant, Hephaestus inverted the basic symbolism of divine hierarchy and transformed the ultimate symbol of authority into an instrument of powerlessness. The choice of gold as the primary material carried additional symbolic weight that would not have been lost on any Olympian observer. Gold represented incorruptibility, eternal value, and divine perfection, qualities that Hera claimed to embody in her role as Queen of the Gods. By using this sacred metal to create an instrument of humiliation, Hephaestus demonstrated that even the most perfect materials could be turned against those who took their superiority for granted. The throne's beauty made its function even more devastating, proving that appearances could deceive even divine perception. When Hephaestus finally emerged from his oceanic exile and appeared on Olympus bearing his masterpiece, the assembled gods received him with a mixture of curiosity and condescension that revealed their fundamental misunderstanding of his transformation. 9 years had passed since his violent expulsion, and many Olympians had forgotten the circumstances of his departure or dismissed him as an irrelevant footnote to divine politics. His physical appearance had changed dramatically during his absence. His body had grown broader and more powerful from years of intensive metalworking. His hands bore the permanent stains of his craft, and his lameness had become more pronounced due to the constant strain of working at underwater forges. The presentation of the throne to Hera unfolded with theatrical precision that demonstrated Hephaestus's understanding of divine psychology and social dynamics. He approached the Queen of the Gods during a formal assembly of the Olympians, when maximum witnesses would be present to observe both the gift-giving and its consequences. His manner combined respectful deference with barely concealed confidence, suggesting both filial devotion and awareness of his own worth. The throne's overwhelming beauty immediately captured Hera's attention and triggered her acquisitive instincts. She could not resist claiming such a magnificent symbol of her authority. The activation of the trap occurred the moment Hera settled onto the throne's cushioned seat. The hidden restraints materialized instantly, wrapping around her wrists, ankles, and torso with fluid grace that transformed the elegant chair into an elaborate prison. Her immediate attempts to rise met with complete failure as the bonds tightened in response to her struggles, and her efforts to employ divine powers to break free only strengthened the mechanisms holding her captive. The assembled Olympians watched in stunned silence as their queen found herself utterly helpless, trapped by a device whose beauty made her predicament even more humiliating. Hera's initial reaction combined outrage, disbelief, and growing panic as she realized the sophistication of her son's revenge. Her demands for immediate release grew increasingly frantic as the restraints proved immune to both her physical strength and her divine authority. The other Olympians' attempts to assist her met with similar failure. The throne's defences had been designed to resist any external interference, making it impossible for even Zeus to break the bonds through direct action. The trap's perfection became increasingly apparent, as every attempted solution only demonstrated its creator's superior understanding of divine limitations. The selection of Dionysus as mediator represented a crucial turning point that revealed Hephaestus's sophisticated understanding of divine psychology and political dynamics. While other Olympians approached the crisis with typical divine arrogance, assuming that superior power could overcome any obstacle, The wine god recognized that this situation required negotiation rather than force. Dionysus possessed unique qualifications that made him ideally suited for diplomatic intervention. His status as a relatively recent addition to the Olympian pantheon gave him outsider perspective on divine politics. His association with intoxication and altered consciousness provided tools for breaking through rigid thinking patterns, and his own experience with family conflict created empathy for both parties in the dispute. The wine god's approach to Hephaestus differed fundamentally from the threats and demands employed by his fellow Olympians. Instead of commanding the craftsman to release his mother, Dionysus offered understanding and recognition of the legitimacy of his grievances. He acknowledged the injustice of Hephaestus's original expulsion and validated his right to seek redress for the trauma he'd suffered. This empathetic approach created an opening for genuine communication that had been absent from previous divine interactions with the exile. Dionysus's mastery of intoxication proved crucial to the success of his diplomatic mission. Rather than attempting to negotiate with Hephaestus in a state of cold sobriety, where resentment and calculation might dominate, the wine god employed his divine powers to create an atmosphere of relaxed conviviality that encouraged honest expression of feelings and desires. The specific vintage he chose for this diplomatic encounter possessed properties that enhanced emotional openness while maintaining mental clarity, allowing both parties to communicate their true positions without the distortions of pride or fear. The negotiation process revealed the depth of Hephaestus's transformation during his oceanic exile and his sophisticated understanding of divine politics. His demands went far beyond simple recognition of his craftsmanship or acknowledgement of his past mistreatment. He required fundamental changes to his status within the Olympian hierarchy that would guarantee his future security and establish his authority within his chosen domain. These demands demonstrated that his revenge had been conceived not as an end in itself, but as a means to achieve lasting transformation of his position within divine society. The first and most crucial demand involved formal recognition of his legitimacy as a full Olympian deity with all associated rights and privileges. This requirement addressed the fundamental source of his original trauma, his rejection from divine society due to physical imperfection. Hephaestus insisted on explicit acknowledgement that his lameness did not disqualify him from full participation in Olympian life, and that any future discrimination based on physical appearance would constitute a violation of divine law. This demand forced the assembled gods to confront their own prejudices and establish new precedents for inclusion within their exclusive community. His second major requirement involved establishment of his exclusive authority over all divine craftsmanship and metallurgy. Hephaestus demanded recognition as the sole legitimate creator of divine weapons, tools, and decorative objects, with other gods required to commission his services rather than attempting their own inferior craftsmanship. This monopoly would provide him with both economic security and social importance that could not be revoked due to personal conflicts or political shifts. The demand also included provisions for a permanent workshop on Olympus equipped with resources adequate for divine-level projects. The third crucial element of his negotiation involved guarantees of respect and consultation in divine decision-making processes. Hephaestus required assurance that his opinions would be solicited and seriously considered in matters affecting the divine community, particularly those involving technological innovation or artistic creation. This demand addressed his exclusion from divine society and ensured that his unique expertise would be valued rather than dismissed. The provision included specific protocols for his participation in divine councils and formal recognition of his advisory role in matters within his domain. The establishment of his role as divine craftsman through this negotiated settlement created precedents that would influence Olympian politics for generations. His successful use of leverage to transform his status from outcast to essential service provider demonstrated alternative paths to power that did not rely on traditional sources of divine authority, such as combat prowess or natural dominion over cosmic forces. The craftsmanship monopoly he secured provided him with unique influence that could not be replicated by other deities, making him indispensable to the continued functioning of divine society. The resolution of the Golden Throne crisis marked Hephaestus's definitive integration into Olympian society, but on terms that he had dictated rather than accepted. His workshop became one of the most important locations on Olympus, regularly visited by gods seeking weapons, jewelry, or mechanical devices that only his skills could provide. The respect he had demanded through negotiation gradually evolved into genuine admiration as his fellow deities experienced firsthand the superiority of his craftsmanship and the reliability of his service. The psychological transformation of Hephaestus from rejected outcast to respected craftsman represented one of the most successful rehabilitation narratives in Greek mythology. His strategic use of his talents to achieve social integration demonstrated that even the most traumatic rejection could be overcome through persistence, skill development, and calculated action. The Golden Throne trap became legendary not merely as an act of revenge, but as a masterpiece of engineering that established new standards for divine craftsmanship, and proved that intelligence and creativity could triumph over traditional forms of power. The establishment of Hephaestus's divine workshop represented far more than the simple allocation of workspace. It marked the creation of the most technologically advanced manufacturing facility in the known cosmos. Located within the volcanic depths of Mount Etna in Sicily, his forge occupied a vast network of interconnected chambers carved directly into the mountain's molten core. The primary workshop stretched nearly a mile in length, its ceilings soaring 200 feet above the main floor to accommodate the massive bellows systems and crane mechanisms necessary for divine-scale metallurgy. The walls, composed of volcanic rock fused with divine metals, radiated a constant amber glow that eliminated the need for external lighting while maintaining temperatures that would instantly vaporize mortal materials. The forge's central feature consisted of 24 individual furnaces arranged in a precise geometric pattern that optimized heat distribution and workflow efficiency. Each furnace burned with flames that exceeded earthly fire by orders of magnitude, fueled by a combination of volcanic gases, divine breath, and exotic materials that existed only within the realm of the gods. The largest furnace, reserved for Hephaestus's most ambitious projects, measured 30 feet in diameter and generated temperatures capable of melting adamantine, the hardest substance known to divine science. Its flames burned with colours that had no earthly equivalent, shifting through spectrums visible only to immortal eyes and producing harmonics that resonated with the fundamental frequencies of creation itself. The workshop's tool collection represented the accumulated knowledge of divine metallurgy spanning countless millennia. Hammers forged from compressed starlight delivered blows with precision measured in fractions of atomic widths, while anvils carved from the bones of primordial titans provided surfaces that could withstand forces capable of reshaping reality. Tongs crafted from crystallized time allowed manipulation of materials across multiple temporal dimensions, enabling Hephaestus to work with substances that existed in past, present, and future simultaneously. Measuring devices calibrated to cosmic constants ensured that every creation met specifications accurate to the movement of celestial bodies and the rhythm of universal expansion. The raw materials stored within the forge's extensive vaults defied conventional understanding of matter and energy. Shelves carved into the volcanic walls held ingots of metals that existed nowhere else in creation. Silver distilled from moonbeams, gold refined from the laughter of gods, iron extracted from the cores of dying stars. Precious stones lined specialized storage chambers, each type requiring specific environmental conditions to maintain their unique properties. Diamonds compressed within the hearts of black holes sat alongside emeralds grown in the gardens of paradise. while sapphires formed from crystallized wisdom shared space with rubies condensed from the blood of heroes. The Cyclops, those ancient one-eyed giants who had served as Zeus's armor-smiths during the Titanomachy, became Hephaestus's most valued collaborators and the backbone of his divine manufacturing operation. These primordial beings possessed strength that dwarfed even divine standards, capable of wielding hammers that weighed more than mountains and manipulating materials with their bare hands that would require elaborate machinery for other immortals to handle. Their single eyes, far from representing a limitation, provided them with depth perception and focus that surpassed binocular vision, allowing them to detect flaws in metalwork invisible to dual-eyed observers and to judge temperatures and material properties with supernatural accuracy. The relationship between Hephaestus and the Cyclopes evolved from simple employer-employee dynamics into a complex partnership based on mutual respect and complementary expertise. While the Cyclops provided the raw physical power necessary for large-scale divine projects, Hephaestus contributed the artistic vision and technical innovation that transformed brute force into sublime craftsmanship. Their collaboration produced synergistic effects that neither party could achieve independently. The Cyclops' strength enabled projects of unprecedented scale, while Hephaestus's creativity pushed their ancient techniques into revolutionary new territories. Each Cyclops specialized in specific aspects of divine metallurgy that reflected their individual personalities and accumulated experience. Brontes, whose name meant thunder, possessed unparalleled expertise in the creation of weapons that channeled atmospheric forces, making him the primary craftsman responsible for Zeus's thunderbolts and other storm-related armaments. Steropes, known as lightning, focused on items that stored and discharged electrical energy, developing techniques for capturing and condensing celestial electricity into portable forms. Arges, called Bright, specialized in weapons and tools that generated or manipulated light, creating items that could blind enemies or illuminate the darkest depths of Tartarus. The collaborative process between Hephaestus and his Cyclops assistants followed established protocols that maximized efficiency while maintaining the highest quality standards. Projects began with detailed consultations where Hephaestus would present his conceptual designs and specifications, while the Cyclopes offered practical insights based on their extensive experience with divine materials and manufacturing processes. These planning sessions often lasted for days, as every aspect of the proposed creation underwent thorough analysis and refinement, ensuring that the final product would meet both functional requirements and aesthetic standards worthy of divine craftsmanship. The actual manufacturing process involved carefully choreographed cooperation that resembled an elaborate dance performed with tools capable of reshaping reality. Hephaestus typically handled the most delicate and precise work, engraving intricate patterns, setting precious stones, calibrating magical properties, while the Cyclops managed the heavy lifting, rough shaping, and bulk processing that required their superior physical strength. Their coordination reached levels of precision that allowed them to work on the same piece simultaneously without interference, each craftsman instinctively understanding the other's movements and timing their actions to complement rather than conflict with their colleagues' efforts. The creation of Zeus's thunderbolts represented the pinnacle of this collaborative relationship and established the template for all subsequent divine weapons. These were not simple projectiles, but complex energy storage and delivery systems that required integration of multiple exotic technologies and materials. The bolt's core consisted of crystallized lightning harvested during the most violent storms in cosmic history, compressed and stabilized through processes that took months to complete. This core was wrapped in layers of divine metals, arranged in specific geometric patterns that amplified and focused the contained energy, while providing the aerodynamic properties necessary for accurate flight across vast distances. The Thunderbolt's guidance system incorporated elements of divine consciousness that allowed Zeus to direct its flight path through mental commands transmitted across any distance. Microscopic engravings covered every surface of the weapon, each symbol contributing to the overall enchantment that enabled the bolt to penetrate any defense and strike with force, proportional to the wielder's divine wrath. The manufacturing process required perfect synchronization between Hephaestus's precision engraving and the Cyclops' energy containment work, as any misalignment between the guidance systems and power core would result in catastrophic failure that could destroy the entire workshop. The armour crafted for Achilles represented an entirely different category of divine creation that showcased Hephaestus's ability to blend protection with artistic expression while incorporating prophetic elements that reflected the hero's destined fate. Unlike the thunderbolts, which served purely functional purposes, Achilles' armour needed to serve as both practical battlefield equipment and an artistic statement worthy of the greatest hero of the Trojan War. The project began when Thetis, Achilles' divine mother and Hephaestus' former rescuer, commissioned the armour as replacement for the equipment lost when Patroclus fell wearing Achilles' original gear. The armour's base material consisted of divine bronze alloyed with metals that existed only in the celestial sphere, creating a substance that provided maximum protection while remaining light enough for human use. The bronze itself had been refined through processes that removed all impurities while enhancing its natural properties, resulting in metal that could deflect weapons forged by gods while maintaining the flexibility necessary for complex combat maneuvers. The alloy's composition included trace amounts of ambrosia, the food of the gods, which imbued the armour with regenerative properties that could repair minor damage automatically and provide limited healing to its wearer. The shield, the armour's centrepiece, measured 5 feet in diameter and featured concentric rings of relief carvings that depicted the entire cosmos in miniature. The outermost ring showed the ocean that surrounded the world, complete with waves that seemed to move when viewed from different angles. The next ring inward portrayed the Earth with its cities, fields, and natural features rendered in such detail that individual trees and buildings could be distinguished despite the shield's relatively small size. The third ring depicted the sky with constellations that matched the actual positions of stars at the moment of the shield's completion, while the innermost ring showed scenes of human life, weddings, battles, harvests, and festivals that captured the full range of mortal experience. The prophetic elements woven into the armour's decoration reflected Hephaestus' ability to perceive temporal dimensions beyond the present moment and his desire to create items that transcended mere functionality to become works of art with deeper meaning. The scenes depicted on various pieces of the armour subtly foreshadowed events from Achilles' future, including his greatest victories and his inevitable death at the hands of Paris and Apollo. These prophetic elements were integrated so seamlessly with the decorative motifs that casual observers would see only beautiful artwork, while those with the knowledge to interpret the symbols could read the hero's entire destiny inscribed in metal. The helmet featured a crest of horsehair dyed with pigments that shifted colour based on the wearer's emotional state, providing both intimidation value in combat and a means for allies to gauge their leader's mental condition during battle. The breastplate bore engravings that depicted the genealogy of heroes, tracing Achilles' lineage back through generations of legendary warriors while incorporating protective symbols that would deflect both physical and magical attacks. The greaves were decorated with scenes of famous foot races, honouring Achilles' renowned speed while incorporating enchantments that enhanced the wearer's natural swiftness and endurance. The golden breastplate created for Heracles presented unique challenges that required Hephaestus to develop entirely new manufacturing techniques capable of producing armour suitable for a hero whose strength exceeded normal human limits by factors that approached divine levels. Heracles' extraordinary physical power meant that conventional armour would either prove too fragile to withstand the stresses generated by his movements, or too rigid to allow the flexibility his combat style required. The solution involved creating a hybrid material that combined the protective properties of divine metals with the adaptability of organic substances, resulting in armor that could strengthen or soften as circumstances demanded. The breastplate's construction utilized a revolutionary layering technique that incorporated thousands of individual scales, each one forged separately and then assembled into a flexible matrix that provided comprehensive protection while allowing unrestricted movement. The scales themselves were crafted from electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver that had been enhanced through divine processes to increase its durability and magical conductivity. Each scale bore microscopic engravings that contributed to the overall protective enchantment, while creating visual effects that made the armor appear to ripple like liquid metal when the wearer moved. The breastplate's most innovative feature involved its ability to grow stronger in response to increasingly powerful attacks, a property that reflected Heracles' own tendency to rise to meet greater challenges. The armor's enchantments drew power from kinetic energy generated by impacts, converting the force of enemy attacks into additional protective strength that made subsequent strikes less effective. This adaptive defense system ensured that the armor would provide adequate protection, regardless of the opponent's power level, making it suitable for a hero whose adventures would pit him against everything from mortal bandits to immortal monsters. The creation of artificial life through divine metallurgy represented Hephaestus' most ambitious and controversial achievements, pushing the boundaries of what even gods considered possible or appropriate. His golden automatons challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of life, consciousness, and the divine prerogative to create sentient beings. These mechanical servants possessed capabilities that exceeded those of many living creatures while raising philosophical questions about the relationship between artificial and natural existence that would influence theological debates for generations. The Golden Maidens, who served as Hephaestus' personal assistants, represented the pinnacle of his automaton crafting abilities and demonstrated his capacity to create artificial beings virtually indistinguishable from living goddesses. Each maiden stood 6 feet tall with proportions that exemplified divine beauty standards, their golden skin polished to a mirror finish that reflected light with supernatural brilliance. Their faces, while sharing certain basic structural similarities, possessed individual characteristics that gave each automaton a distinct personality and appearance. Their hair, spun from the finest golden wire, moved with natural fluidity despite its metallic composition, while their eyes, fashioned from sapphires cut with impossible precision, tracked movement and expressed emotions with startling realism. The internal mechanisms that animated these golden servants incorporated principles of divine engineering that transcended conventional understanding of mechanics and consciousness. Their power source consisted of miniaturized versions of the same cosmic forces that animated the gods themselves, contained within chest cavities that served as both energy storage and processing centers. Neural networks crafted from crystallized thought patterns allowed the automatons to learn, adapt, and make independent decisions within the parameters of their programming, while memory cores forged from compressed time enabled them to retain experiences and develop individual preferences and quirks. The walking tripods represented a different approach to artificial life that prioritized functionality over anthropomorphic appearance, while demonstrating Hephaestus' ability to create servants suited for specific tasks. These 3-legged tables, each standing 4 feet high and capable of supporting tremendous weight, moved through the workshop with surprising grace and intelligence, anticipating their master's needs and positioning themselves to provide maximum utility. Their legs, crafted from divine bronze and articulated with joints that allowed movement in multiple directions, could extend or contract to adjust the table height while maintaining perfect stability even on uneven surfaces. The tripod's most remarkable feature involved their ability to understand and respond to verbal commands while demonstrating initiative in situations not explicitly covered by their programming. They could identify tools and materials by name, retrieve specific items from storage locations throughout the vast workshop, and even perform simple manufacturing tasks under Hephaestus' supervision. Their intelligence, while clearly artificial, exhibited characteristics that suggested genuine understanding rather than mere programmed responses, leading to philosophical debates among the gods about the nature of consciousness and the ethics of creating sentient servants. The Commission of Pandora emerged from one of the most consequential acts of defiance in the relationship between gods and mortals: Prometheus's theft of divine fire and his subsequent gift of this sacred element to humanity. The Titan's transgression represented far more than simple theft. It constituted a fundamental challenge to the cosmic order that Zeus had established following his victory over the older generation of divine beings. Fire, in Greek theological understanding, symbolized not merely physical warmth and light, but the spark of civilization itself. The capacity for technological advancement, artistic creation, and intellectual development that separated rational beings from mere animals. Prometheus's decision to steal fire stemmed from his role as humanity's patron and protector, a position that placed him in direct conflict with Zeus's vision for mortal limitations. The king of the gods had deliberately withheld fire from human beings as part of a broader strategy to maintain divine supremacy and prevent mortals from developing capabilities that might threaten celestial authority. Without fire, humans remain dependent on divine favour for survival, unable to forge weapons, cook food efficiently, or develop the metallurgical skills necessary for advanced civilization. This dependency ensured their continued subservience to divine will while preventing the emergence of human technologies that could challenge godly power. The theft itself required extraordinary cunning and unprecedented boldness, as Prometheus needed to penetrate the heavily guarded divine realm and extract fire from sources protected by Zeus's most powerful enchantments. The Titan concealed the stolen flame within a hollow fennel stalk, a plant whose fibrous interior could sustain combustion while its outer surface remained cool enough to handle. This ingenious method allowed him to transport the divine fire to Earth without detection, where he distributed it among human settlements and taught mortals the techniques necessary to maintain and utilize their newfound power. The immediate consequences of fire's introduction to humanity exceeded even Prometheus's optimistic projections. Human civilization advanced with startling rapidity as communities learned to smelt metals, forge tools, and develop agricultural techniques that dramatically increased food production. Cities grew larger and more sophisticated as fire-based technologies enabled construction of permanent structures and development of specialized crafts. Most significantly from Zeus's perspective, humans began developing military capabilities that reduced their vulnerability to divine intervention, while increasing their capacity for independent action. Zeus's reaction to this unprecedented challenge combined personal outrage with strategic calculation as he recognized the long-term implications of humanity's technological advancement. The theft represented not only a direct violation of his explicit commands, but also a fundamental threat to the cosmic hierarchy that placed gods above mortals in all matters of power and capability. If humans continued developing at their current pace, they might eventually achieve levels of technological sophistication that would make divine intervention unnecessary or even unwelcome, undermining the entire basis of religious worship and divine authority. The decision to create woman as punishment for humanity reflected Zeus's sophisticated understanding of social dynamics and his recognition that direct military retaliation would only validate human fears about divine tyranny while potentially driving mortals toward greater unity and resistance. Instead of destroying human civilization outright, he chose to introduce an element of internal discord that would limit humanity's potential for coordinated advancement while providing entertainment for the gods who observed mortal struggles with detached amusement. The concept of woman as punishment reveals deeply problematic aspects of Greek gender ideology that reflected broader cultural attitudes toward female agency and social disruption. In the mythological framework that produced the Pandora narrative, women represented sources of temptation, deception, and social instability that could undermine male-dominated communities and divert masculine energy away from productive activities. This perspective, while clearly reflecting the patriarchal biases of ancient Greek society, became embedded in religious doctrine through myths that presented female existence as divine punishment rather than natural complement to male humanity. Zeus's commission to Hephaestus launched the most ambitious collaborative project in divine history, requiring coordination among multiple Olympian deities and integration of their various specialties into a single creation. The king of the gods recognized that crafting the first woman demanded expertise beyond any individual deity's capabilities, necessitating a team approach that would combine Hephaestus's unparalleled skill in physical construction with other gods' mastery of psychological, social, and spiritual attributes. This collaborative model established precedents for divine cooperation that would influence subsequent major projects requiring multiple areas of expertise. Hephaestus received the commission with characteristic professionalism, approaching the task as he would any complex engineering challenge, while setting aside personal considerations about the project's ultimate purpose. His role involved creating the physical foundation upon which other deities would build their contributions, a body that could sustain divine enhancements while remaining fundamentally mortal in nature. This requirement presented unique technical challenges, as the form needed to accommodate supernatural gifts without becoming so enhanced that it transcended human limitations entirely. The selection of clay as the primary construction material reflected both practical considerations and deeper symbolic meanings that connected the first woman to fundamental forces of creation and transformation. Clay possessed unique properties that made it ideally suited for divine manipulation, sufficient plasticity to accept detailed shaping while maintaining structural integrity throughout the construction process. More significantly, clay represented the intersection between earth and water, two primordial elements that symbolize fertility, growth, and the potential for both creation and destruction. Hephaestus began the construction process by gathering clay from specific locations that possessed the necessary magical properties for sustaining artificial life. The primary source consisted of riverbank deposits from the Styx, the sacred river that bound divine oaths and separated the world of the living from the realm of the dead. This clay had been enriched by centuries of contact with divine essence, as gods crossed the river to swear unbreakable vows, imbuing it with properties that could bridge the gap between mortal and immortal existence. The crafting process required techniques that pushed even Hephaestus's considerable abilities to their limits, as he needed to create a form that appeared completely natural while incorporating hidden structures capable of supporting divine enhancements. The skeletal framework consisted of divine bronze wires so fine they became invisible once embedded in the clay matrix, providing internal support that would prevent structural collapse while allowing natural movement and flexibility. These support structures followed the exact proportions that Greek artists considered perfect for female beauty, ensuring that the finished form would meet the highest aesthetic standards. The muscular and circulatory systems required even greater precision as Hephaestus crafted networks of channels and chambers that could sustain life without requiring the complex biological processes that animated natural creatures. The circulatory system utilized flows of liquid gold that would provide both structural support and the life force necessary for consciousness, while the respiratory system incorporated bellows, mechanisms so sophisticated they operated without conscious control. These artificial organs functioned through principles that combined mechanical engineering with divine magic, creating hybrid systems that transcended conventional distinctions between artificial and natural life. The The facial features demanded Hephaestus's greatest artistic skill, as he shaped expressions that would convey both innocence and hidden complexity, creating a countenance that would inspire immediate trust while concealing the supernatural gifts that other gods would later implant. The eyes, crafted from precious stones that had been polished to achieve perfect transparency, possessed the capacity to reflect light in ways that would make them appear alive and responsive. The mouth, shaped with microscopic precision, could produce the full range of human speech while being capable of delivering words imbued with divine power. The process of breathing life into the clay form represented the most crucial and dangerous phase of the construction, requiring Hephaestus to channel divine essence directly into artificial matter without destroying the delicate balance between mortal and immortal elements. He began by heating the completed form in his most powerful furnace, raising the temperature to levels that would activate the magical properties of the Stygian clay while avoiding the extreme heat that would reduce the figure to ash. The clay's colour shifted from grey to golden bronze as the divine essence within it awakened, while the internal mechanisms began functioning with the precision of the finest clockwork. The moment of animation occurred when Hephaestus breathed directly onto the form's face, transferring a portion of his own divine life force into the artificial body. The clay lips parted as the respiratory system activated, drawing its first breath with a sound that echoed throughout the volcanic workshop. The eyes opened to reveal pupils that reflected the forge's flames, while demonstrating the capacity for independent thought and perception. The limbs moved with natural grace as the artificial muscles responded to neural commands generated by the crystalline brain that Hephaestus had embedded within the skull. The collaborative enhancement process began immediately following successful animation as other Olympian deities arrived to contribute their specialized gifts to Zeus's creation. Aphrodite approached first, her role involving the implantation of irresistible beauty and sexual allure that would ensure the first woman's acceptance by human males while creating the potential for romantic discord that Zeus desired. The goddess of love worked with techniques that modified the artificial form at levels invisible to mortal perception, adjusting proportions and enhancing features in ways that would trigger instinctive attraction while remaining within the bounds of natural human variation. Athena's contribution focused on practical skills and intellectual capabilities that would make the first woman a valuable addition to human society while ensuring her integration into existing social structures. The goddess of wisdom implanted knowledge of weaving, cooking, household management, and other domestic arts that Greek culture considered essential feminine accomplishments. However, these skills came with subtle limitations that would prevent the first woman from achieving the same levels of technological innovation that men might pursue, maintaining gender-based divisions that would limit humanity's overall advancement potential. Hermes received the responsibility for the most psychologically complex enhancements, as his gifts would determine the first woman's personality and behavioral patterns. The messenger god implanted traits that combined appealing surface characteristics with hidden tendencies toward deception and manipulation. Curiosity became one of her dominant traits, a quality that would drive her toward the discovery and opening of the fateful jar while appearing to be a natural and admirable aspect of her personality. The god also embedded sophisticated linguistic abilities that would enable her to communicate persuasively while concealing her true intentions when necessary. The creation of Pandora's jar, often mistranslated as a box in later traditions, represented a separate but equally crucial component of Zeus's punishment scheme. Hephaestus crafted this container using techniques that paralleled those employed in creating the woman herself, fashioning a vessel that appeared innocuous while containing forces capable of fundamentally altering human existence. The jar's construction utilized clay from the same Stygian sources as Pandora herself, creating a sympathetic connection between container and opener that would ensure the inevitable fulfillment of Zeus's plan. The jar's exterior design embodied classical Greek aesthetic principles, while incorporating subtle elements that would trigger curiosity in any observer. The surface bore relief carvings depicting scenes of human happiness and prosperity, abundant harvests, successful hunts, peaceful communities, and loving families. These images served a dual purpose, both concealing the jar's true contents and creating psychological associations that would make opening it seem likely to bring positive benefits, rather than catastrophic consequences. The contents sealed within the jar represented a comprehensive catalogue of human suffering and social discord, each element carefully selected and prepared by different divine specialists. Disease came from Apollo, who contributed plagues that would weaken human bodies and reduce lifespans, while creating dependence on divine healing. War originated from Ares, who provided the seeds of conflict that would divide human communities and prevent the cooperation necessary for major technological or social advances. Envy, hatred, greed, and other destructive emotions came from various minor deities who specialized in psychological manipulation and social disruption. The process of sealing these destructive forces within the jar required techniques that prevented their premature release, while ensuring that they would emerge with maximum impact when the container was eventually opened. Hephaestus created a containment system that utilized the same principles employed in his golden throne trap, with mechanisms that would activate in response to specific triggers while remaining completely invisible to casual observation. The jar's lid appeared to be secured by simple wax seals, but these visible closures concealed far more sophisticated barriers that drew their power from cosmic forces. Hope remained within the jar not as an oversight or act of divine mercy, but as a calculated component of Zeus's punishment strategy. The king of the gods recognized that complete despair would likely drive humanity toward either complete submission or desperate rebellion, neither of which served his long-term interests in maintaining a population of worshippers who remained active and productive while acknowledging divine supremacy. Hope would ensure that humans continued striving and building despite their increased suffering, providing entertainment for the gods while preventing the total collapse of mortal civilization. The theological implications of the Pandora narrative extend far beyond its surface function as an explanation for human suffering, revealing fundamental assumptions about gender, divine justice, and the proper relationship between gods and mortals that shaped Greek religious thought for centuries. The myth established woman as the source of humanity's problems while simultaneously presenting her as an irresistible necessity for human reproduction and social completion. This paradox created psychological tensions that influenced Greek attitudes toward marriage, sexuality, and gender relations throughout the classical period. The concept of collective punishment embedded in the Pandora story reflects Greek theological beliefs about the interconnected nature of human society and the gods' right to hold entire populations responsible for individual transgressions. Prometheus's theft affected all humanity through the punishment of woman's creation, establishing precedents for divine justice that operated through broad social consequences rather than targeted individual retribution. This approach to divine punishment would influence Greek understanding of natural disasters, military defeats, and social upheavals as potential consequences of communal moral failures. The political machinations that led to the marriage between Hephaestus and Aphrodite began during the immediate aftermath of Zeus's liberation from the golden throne trap. As the king of the gods sat in council with his fellow Olympians, nursing his wounded pride and contemplating appropriate rewards for his son's crucial intervention, the question of Aphrodite's marital status emerged as a pressing concern that demanded immediate resolution. The goddess of love had remained conspicuously unmarried since her dramatic arrival on Olympus, a situation that created increasing tensions among the male deities who competed for her attention with escalating intensity. Aphrodite's unmarried status posed significant threats to Olympian stability that extended far beyond simple romantic rivalry. Her divine nature compelled her to inspire passion and desire in all who encountered her, creating a constant state of sexual tension among the gods that frequently erupted into open conflict. Ares and Apollo had already engaged in several violent confrontations over her favours, while Poseidon and Hermes maintained an uneasy truce that could shatter at any moment. Even Zeus himself felt the pull of her supernatural allure, her attraction that threatened to destabilise his marriage to Hera and potentially trigger another devastating divine war. The goddess's own attitude toward marriage reflected her fundamental nature as the embodiment of sexual desire rather than domestic commitment. Aphrodite viewed matrimony as an artificial constraint that would limit her freedom to bestow her favours according to her whims and desires. She had successfully resisted all previous attempts at arranged marriages by employing her considerable powers of persuasion and emotional manipulation, turning potential suitors against each other and creating such chaos that previous marriage negotiations had collapsed in acrimony and violence. Zeus's decision to reward Hephaestus with marriage to the most beautiful goddess represented a calculated solution to multiple problems that had been plaguing Olympian politics for generations. The craftsman's crucial role in securing the king's freedom from the golden throne trap had earned him significant political capital that required appropriate recognition, while his established position as a respected member of the divine community made him a suitable candidate for such an honour. More importantly, his physical disabilities and social awkwardness made him the least threatening choice among potential husbands, minimising the risk that Aphrodite's marriage would create a powerful rival to Zeus's authority. The strategic brilliance of this arrangement lay in its potential to neutralise multiple sources of instability through a single political manoeuvre. Aphrodite's marriage would remove her from circulation as an object of divine competition, reducing tensions among the male gods while establishing clear boundaries around her sexuality. Hephaestus would receive recognition and reward that acknowledged his contributions to Olympian society while binding him more closely to the established power structure through family connections. The marriage would also create a buffer between Zeus and Aphrodite's dangerous allure, providing him with plausible distance from temptation while maintaining access to her beauty through family gatherings and official functions. The announcement of the engagement created immediate controversy throughout Olympus, as gods struggled to comprehend Zeus's reasoning behind such an apparently mismatched pairing. Ares reacted with barely controlled fury, viewing the decision as a personal insult that deprived him of his rightful claim to the goddess he had pursued most persistently. Apollo expressed his displeasure through subtle but cutting remarks about the appropriateness of uniting divine beauty with physical imperfection, while Poseidon retreated into sullen silence that suggested deeper resentments about his brother's arbitrary exercise of patriarchal authority. Hera's response to the marriage announcement revealed the complex layers of emotion and calculation that characterized her relationship with her husband and stepson. On one level, she approved of the match because it removed a significant source of temptation from Zeus's immediate environment, while providing her formerly rejected son with the ultimate symbol of divine acceptance and success. However, she also recognized the potential for future complications, as Aphrodite's nature made it unlikely that she would remain faithful to a husband she had not chosen and clearly did not desire. The goddess of love herself received the news of her betrothal with a mixture of outrage and calculating assessment that reflected her sophisticated understanding of divine politics and her own limited options within the patriarchal structure of Olympian society. Her initial impulse toward open rebellion quickly gave way to more strategic thinking as she realized that direct defiance of Zeus's will would likely result in severe punishment that could permanently damage her status and influence. Instead, she began developing plans for maintaining her freedom and pursuing her desires within the constraints of an unwanted marriage. Aphrodite's premarital behavior demonstrated her intention to extract maximum enjoyment from her remaining days of official freedom, while establishing patterns that would continue after her wedding. She intensified her relationships with her most favoured lovers, particularly Ares, whose warrior nature and passionate temperament provided the excitement and danger that she craved. These liaisons became increasingly bold and public, serving both as acts of defiance against Zeus's control and as clear signals to her future husband about her intentions regarding marital fidelity. The contrast between bride and groom became the subject of extensive commentary throughout the divine realm, with observers struggling to understand how such fundamentally different beings could be expected to find happiness together. Aphrodite embodied everything that Greek culture valued in feminine beauty: perfect proportions, flawless skin that seemed to glow within a light, golden hair that moved with supernatural grace, and eyes that could inspire immediate and overwhelming desire in any male observer. Her voice carried musical qualities that made even casual conversation sound like seduction, while her movements possessed a fluid elegance that transformed simple walking into an art form. Hephaestus presented an almost deliberate contrast to his bride's perfection, his appearance shaped by years of intensive physical labour and the permanent effects of his childhood injuries. His massive shoulders and heavily muscled arms testified to countless hours at the forge, while his hands bore the permanent stains and scars of metal working that no amount of divine healing could completely erase. His lameness had become more pronounced with age and constant work, creating an uneven gait that made his movements appear clumsy and ungraceful compared to the fluid motion that characterized other Olympians. The physical disparity between husband and wife served as a visible reminder of the artificial nature of their union and the political rather than romantic motivations that had brought them together. Greek aesthetic sensibilities, which prize symmetry and proportion as reflections of inner virtue and divine favour, were offended by the sight of beauty paired with deformity in such an intimate relationship. This visual discord reinforced cultural assumptions about the proper matching of partners, while highlighting the tensions inherent in marriages arranged for political rather than personal reasons. The wedding ceremony itself reflected the complex emotions and political undercurrents surrounding this controversial union, with elaborate rituals designed to mask the fundamental unwillingness of the bride and the awkwardness of the groom. Zeus spared no expense in creating a celebration that would demonstrate his power and generosity, while establishing the marriage's legitimacy through spectacular display and divine participation. The festivities lasted for 7 days and nights, with each day featuring different events designed to showcase various aspects of Olympian culture and divine authority. The ceremony began with traditional purification rituals that symbolically prepared both bride and groom for their new roles as married deities. Aphrodite submitted to these procedures with barely concealed impatience, her compliance clearly motivated by political necessity rather than genuine acceptance of her situation. Hephaestus approached his purification with characteristic seriousness, treating each ritual element as a technical process that required precise execution rather than an emotional experience that celebrated his upcoming happiness. The exchange of vows took place in Zeus's great hall, before an audience that included every major Olympian deity and hundreds of minor gods, nymphs, and divine servants. The bride spoke her promises in a voice that maintained perfect technical correctness, while conveying no warmth or enthusiasm, her words fulfilling the legal requirements of divine marriage without suggesting any personal investment in their meaning. Hephaestus delivered his vows with obvious sincerity and deep emotion, his rough voice trembling with genuine feeling as he pledged his devotion and fidelity to a wife who clearly did not reciprocate his sentiments. The wedding gifts presented to the couple reflected both the giver's relationships with the bride and groom and their assessments of the marriage's likely success. Zeus contributed a magnificent palace that would serve as the couple's primary residence, complete with workshops for Hephaestus and gardens designed to appeal to Aphrodite's aesthetic sensibilities. Hera presented elaborate jewellery that emphasised the bride's beauty, while subtly reinforcing expectations about proper wifely behaviour. Ares gave weapons of exceptional quality, ostensibly for the groom's protection, but clearly intended as a reminder of the war god's continued presence in Aphrodite's life. The most significant gift came from Hephaestus himself, who presented his bride with a golden girdle of his own creation that enhanced her already supernatural beauty while serving as a symbol of their marital bond. The girdle incorporated technologies and materials that exceeded even his previous masterpieces, with golden threads so fine they became invisible while worn, and enchantments that amplified the wearer's natural allure to unprecedented levels. The gift demonstrated both his skill as a craftsman and his genuine affection for his unwilling bride, though Aphrodite's reaction suggested she viewed it more as a beautiful constraint than a token of love. The early months of their marriage established patterns that would characterize their relationship throughout its duration, with Hephaestus attempting to win his wife's affection through devotion and generosity, while Aphrodite maintained emotional distance that bordered on indifference. The god of the forge threw himself into creating gifts for his bride with obsessive intensity, producing jewelry, decorative objects, and mechanical marvels designed to please her aesthetic sensibilities and demonstrate his worth as a husband. Each creation represented hours of meticulous work and careful attention to her preferences, yet none succeeded in generating the warmth and appreciation he desperately sought. Aphrodite accepted these offerings with polite acknowledgement that revealed her fundamental lack of interest in either the gifts themselves or the emotions that motivated their creation. Her responses followed the minimal requirements of courtesy without suggesting genuine gratitude or affection, creating an emotional dynamic that left Hephaestus increasingly frustrated and desperate. The goddess's indifference stemmed not from cruelty, but from her essential nature as a being driven by passion and desire, rather than domestic contentment and gradual affection. The couple's domestic arrangements reflected their incompatible natures and the artificial circumstances of their union. Hephaestus maintained his primary workshop in the volcanic depths of Mount Etna, where he continued his crafting work with the Cyclops while attempting to create a home environment that might appeal to his reluctant wife. He installed elaborate gardens filled with flowers that bloomed year-round, fountains that played music composed specifically for Aphrodite's enjoyment, and chambers decorated with precious stones and metals, arranged in patterns designed to complement her beauty. Aphrodite established her own separate residence on Olympus proper, claiming that the volcanic environment of her husband's forge was unsuitable for her delicate nature and aesthetic requirements. This physical separation allowed her to maintain her previous lifestyle while technically fulfilling the legal requirements of marriage, creating a situation where the couple lived as virtual strangers who occasionally met for official functions and social obligations. The arrangement satisfied neither party but provided a workable compromise that avoided the constant friction that would have resulted from closer cohabitation. The goddess's continued relationships with other lovers became an open secret throughout Olympus, though initially conducted with sufficient discretion to avoid direct confrontation with her husband or challenge to Zeus's authority. Her most significant affair involved Ares, whose passionate nature and warrior's physique provided everything that her marriage lacked in terms of excitement and physical attraction. The war god's own frustration at losing Aphrodite to an arranged marriage made him a willing participant in adultery that served both his desires and his need for revenge against Zeus's arbitrary decision-making. Their liaison followed patterns established during Aphrodite's unmarried period, but gained additional intensity from the forbidden nature of adultery and the thrill of deceiving the husband they both viewed as unworthy of divine beauty. Ares would arrive at Aphrodite's residence during Hephaestus's extended absences at his forge, timing his visits to avoid detection while maximizing their opportunities for intimate encounters. The goddess welcomed these visits with enthusiasm that contrasted sharply with her cold reception of her husband's attempts at affection, demonstrating clearly where her preferences lay. The development of Hephaestus's suspicions occurred gradually as he began noticing subtle changes in his wife's behaviour and unexplained absences from her usual haunts. His intelligence and observational skills, honed by years of precise craftsmanship, made him naturally inclined to notice details that others might overlook. Aphrodite's increased attention to her appearance before certain social events, her reluctance to discuss her activities during his working hours, and her obvious contentment despite their marital difficulties all suggested explanations that he preferred not to contemplate. The craftsman's initial response to these suspicions involved increased efforts to win his wife's affection through more elaborate gifts and greater attention to her stated preferences and desires. He created new jewellery that incorporated her favourite gems and metals, redesigned portions of their shared spaces to better accommodate her aesthetic requirements, and attempted to spend more time away from his forge to provide the companionship she claimed to desire. These efforts produced no noticeable improvement in their relationship, while consuming time and energy that might have been better directed toward his professional responsibilities. The confirmation of his worst fears came through a combination of divine gossip and personal observation that left no room for self-deception or hopeful interpretation. Minor deities who frequented Olympian social circles began making subtle references to Aphrodite's activities that clearly implied knowledge of her adultery, while their careful avoidance of direct statements suggested awareness that the topic remained officially unacknowledged. Hephaestus's own observations during unexpected returns to Olympus revealed evidence of recent masculine presence in his wife's chambers, unfamiliar scents, displaced furniture, and other signs that confirmed his growing suspicions. The decision to create the golden net trap represented a fundamental shift in Hephaestus's approach to his marital problems, moving from attempts at reconciliation to plans for public vindication and revenge. The project combined his technical expertise with his deep understanding of both divine psychology and Olympian social dynamics, creating a trap that would serve multiple purposes beyond simple detection of adultery. The net would provide irrefutable proof of his wife's infidelity, while humiliating both lovers in the most public manner possible, transforming his private shame into their public disgrace. The net's construction required months of careful planning and precise execution, with Hephaestus working in absolute secrecy to avoid premature discovery of his intentions. The basic material consisted of golden wire drawn to impossible thinness, individual strands measured less than a human hair's width, while possessing strength that could restrain even divine struggles. The manufacturing process required techniques that pushed his abilities to their absolute limits, as the wire needed to be strong enough to hold struggling gods while remaining invisible to casual observation. The trap's design incorporated lessons learned from his earlier success with Hera's throne, utilizing similar principles of concealment and activation, while adapting them to the specific requirements of catching mobile targets in a domestic setting. The net lay dormant within the structure of Aphrodite's bedroom, woven through the very fabric of walls, ceiling and furnishings, in patterns that followed natural architectural lines and decorative elements. Activation required the simultaneous presence of both Aphrodite and another divine male within the specified area, ensuring that the trap would only trigger under circumstances that confirmed adultery rather than innocent social interaction. The net's triggering mechanism responded to the unique combination of divine essences that occurred when Aphrodite engaged in intimate contact with any male deity other than her husband. The system could distinguish between casual social interaction and romantic involvement through analysis of emotional emanations and physical proximity, preventing false activations while ensuring that actual adultery would result in immediate capture. Once triggered, the net would emerge from concealment with lightning speed, enveloping both lovers in bonds that grew stronger with struggle while broadcasting their predicament throughout Olympus. The psychological preparation for springing his trap required Hephaestus to overcome natural reluctance to expose his private humiliation to public scrutiny and divine ridicule. The decision to proceed with such dramatic action represented a fundamental change in his character, moving from patient acceptance of mistreatment to active assertion of his rights and dignity as a husband. This transformation reflected both his growing confidence in his position within Olympian society and his recognition that continued tolerance of adultery would only encourage further disrespect and undermining of his authority. The execution of the plan required precise timing and careful manipulation of circumstances to ensure that both lovers would be present and engaged in compromising activity when the trap activated. Hephaestus announced his intention to spend several days at his forge working on a major commission, providing Ares and Aphrodite with what appeared to be a perfect opportunity for an extended liaison. He then concealed himself near Olympus to monitor the situation and witness the trap's activation, ensuring that he would be present to control the aftermath and maximize the political impact of his revenge. The moment of capture occurred exactly as Hephaestus had planned, with Ares arriving at Aphrodite's chambers shortly after the supposed departure for Mount Etna. The lovers' eagerness to take advantage of their perceived privacy led them to engage in intimate activity with unusual boldness, triggering the net's activation systems and resulting in their immediate entanglement. The golden bonds materialized around them with perfect precision, securing both deities in positions that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship, while preventing any possibility of escape or concealment. The public revelation of the adultery created immediate sensation throughout Olympus, as the net's broadcasting systems transmitted images of the trapped lovers to every corner of the divine realm. The sight of Ares and Aphrodite bound together in compromising circumstances provided entertainment that surpassed even the most dramatic divine conflicts in terms of scandal and social impact. The humiliation was complete and undeniable, transforming Hephaestus from a figure of pity into an object of admiration for his clever revenge, while reducing his wife and her lover to sources of ridicule and moral condemnation. The assembled gods' reactions to the spectacle revealed the complex social dynamics and moral standards that governed Olympian society, with responses varying according to individual relationships with the trapped lovers and personal attitudes toward marriage and adultery. The male deities generally expressed approval for Hephaestus's ingenuity, while enjoying the discomfort of Ares, whose arrogance and aggressive nature had earned him few friends among his fellow gods. Their laughter and crude commentary demonstrated both their appreciation for the technical achievement represented by the trap and their satisfaction at seeing the war god's pride brought low through public humiliation. The female goddesses' responses proved far more complex and morally ambiguous, reflecting their own experiences with arranged marriages and the limited options available to divine women within Olympian society's patriarchal structure. Hera observed the scene with satisfaction that stemmed not from moral outrage, but from vindication of her own suspicions about Aphrodite's character and her son's intelligence. The Queen of the Gods had long predicted that the marriage would end in scandal, and the public exposure of adultery confirmed her assessment, while demonstrating Hephaestus's growth from rejected child to capable adult who could defend his own interests. Athena's reaction combined intellectual appreciation for the trap's sophisticated engineering with disapproval of the entire situation's moral implications. The goddess of wisdom recognized the technical brilliance required to create such an effective device, while questioning whether public humiliation represented the most constructive response to marital infidelity. Her comments focused on the trap's mechanical innovations rather than its emotional or social consequences, treating the entire affair as an interesting case study in applied divine engineering rather than a personal tragedy requiring sympathy or moral judgment. Artemis expressed the strongest disapproval of the spectacle, viewing the public display of sexuality as fundamentally offensive regardless of its context or justification. The virgin goddess's discomfort with any form of sexual exhibition made her criticism particularly sharp, though her condemnation focused equally on Hephaestus's decision to expose the adultery publicly and on the lovers' lack of discretion in conducting their affair. Her reaction reflected broader divine attitudes about the appropriate boundaries between private behaviour and public knowledge, even when that behaviour violated established social norms. The minor deities and divine servants who witnessed the scene provided the most enthusiastic audience for Hephaestus's revenge, their reactions uncomplicated by political considerations or personal relationships with the trapped lovers. Nymphs, satyrs, and lesser gods gathered in increasing numbers as news of the spectacle spread throughout Olympus, creating a carnival atmosphere that transformed the adultery's exposure into the most entertaining event in recent divine memory. Their laughter and commentary provided the public humiliation that Hephaestus had sought, while demonstrating his success in turning private shame into public vindication. The trapped lovers themselves experienced the exposure differently, their reactions shaped by their distinct personalities and previous experiences with scandal and social disapproval. Ares initially responded with typical warrior fury, struggling against the golden bonds with increasing violence while hurling threats and curses at his captor. His rage stemmed not from shame about the adultery itself, but from humiliation at being outmaneuvered by a god he had consistently underestimated and dismissed as physically and socially inferior. The war god's struggles only tightened the net's grip, while providing additional entertainment for the assembled observers, who enjoyed watching his legendary strength prove useless against Hephaestus's superior craftsmanship. Each violent attempt to break free resulted in more secure restraint and greater loss of dignity, creating a feedback loop that transformed Ares from a figure of fear and respect into an object of ridicule and amusement. His reputation for invincible might suffered permanent damage as witnesses spread stories about his helplessness when confronted with superior intelligence and planning. Aphrodite's response demonstrated greater sophistication and self-control as she quickly recognized that emotional outbursts would only worsen her situation, while providing additional satisfaction to her husband and entertainment to their audience. The goddess of love adopted an attitude of resigned dignity that minimized her humiliation while preserving what remained of her social standing. Her silence contrasted sharply with Ares's violent protests, creating an impression of comparative maturity that somewhat mitigated the damage to her reputation. However, beneath her composed exterior, Aphrodite experienced genuine shock at the sophistication of her husband's revenge and the completeness of her miscalculation regarding his capabilities. She had consistently underestimated Hephaestus's intelligence and determination, while overestimating her own ability to conduct affairs without detection or consequence. The trap's existence proved that her husband possessed both the technical skills and emotional resolve necessary to defend his interests, transforming him from a figure of pity into a potential threat that required more careful consideration in future dealings. The most revealing reactions came from gods who had previously competed for Aphrodite's attention, their responses exposing the shallow nature of their supposed devotion and the opportunistic motivations behind their romantic pursuits. Apollo quickly distanced himself from any association with the disgraced goddess, making pointed remarks about the importance of marital fidelity and the natural consequences of moral transgression. His sudden moral stance contrasted sharply with his previous eager pursuit of Aphrodite's favours, revealing the conditional nature of divine loyalty and romantic interest. Poseidon's reaction proved more complex and ultimately more significant for the resolution of the crisis. The sea god initially joined the general laughter and commentary surrounding the spectacle, enjoying the discomfort of his nephew Ares and the vindication of his brother's marriage arrangements. However, as the entertainment value of the situation began to diminish and the broader implications became clear, Poseidon recognized that the public humiliation had achieved its purpose and that continued exposure would serve no constructive function, while potentially creating new problems for Olympian stability. The Earthshaker's intervention reflected both genuine concern for divine dignity and calculated political maneuvering designed to position himself as a reasonable mediator in family disputes. His approach to Hephaestus combined acknowledgement of the craftsman's justified anger with practical arguments about the benefits of ending the public spectacle before it generated additional complications. Poseidon emphasized that the trap's success had already accomplished everything that revenge could reasonably achieve, while suggesting that continued humiliation might provoke desperate actions from the trapped lovers or their supporters. The negotiation process between Poseidon and Hephaestus revealed the craftsman's transformation from impulsive victim to calculating strategist who understood the importance of extracting maximum advantage from his position of strength. Unlike his previous willingness to accept whatever terms others offered, Hephaestus now insisted on specific guarantees and compensations that would protect his interests and establish clear boundaries for future behaviour. His demands reflected both practical concerns about preventing future adultery and deeper needs for respect and recognition that had been denied throughout his marriage. The primary demand involved public acknowledgement of wrongdoing from both Ares and Aphrodite, with specific admissions of guilt that would establish the legitimacy of Hephaestus's actions while creating precedents for similar situations in the future. This requirement went beyond simple apology to include formal recognition of his rights as a husband and acceptance of his authority within his own household. The public nature of these admissions would serve as ongoing protection against future challenges to his dignity, while demonstrating that even the most powerful gods faced consequences for violating established social norms. Financial compensation represented another crucial element of the settlement, with Hephaestus demanding payment that reflected both the material costs of his wife's infidelity and the emotional damages he'd suffered through public humiliation. The specific amount requested exceeded typical divine settlements for similar offences, establishing his determination to extract full value from his position of strength, while creating deterrent effects that might discourage future adultery. Poseidon's willingness to guarantee payment demonstrated the seriousness with which Olympian leadership viewed the crisis and their commitment to resolving it through negotiated settlement rather than continued public spectacle. The most innovative aspect of the settlement involved establishment of ongoing monitoring systems that would provide Hephaestus with early warning of any future adultery while maintaining his wife's basic privacy rights. These arrangements reflected lessons learned from the current crisis about the importance of preventing problems rather than simply punishing them after they occurred. The monitoring systems would utilize Hephaestus's technical expertise to create surveillance networks that could detect suspicious behavior without requiring the elaborate trap mechanisms that had been necessary for the current exposure. The release mechanism for the golden net required careful coordination to ensure that the trapped lovers' freedom coincided with their public acceptance of the settlement terms and payment of required compensation. Hephaestus had designed the restraints with multiple release protocols that could be activated independently, allowing him to maintain control over the timing and circumstances of liberation, while preventing any possibility of escape without fulfilling agreed obligations. The technical complexity of these systems demonstrated his continued evolution as both craftsman and strategist. The actual moment of release occurred during a formal ceremony that transformed the adultery's exposure from scandalous entertainment into a legal proceeding with binding consequences for all parties involved. Poseidon presided over the proceedings in his capacity as mediator, ensuring that each element of the settlement received proper acknowledgement and documentation. The assembled gods served as witnesses to the agreements, creating social pressure for compliance while establishing precedents that would influence similar disputes in the future. Ares' liberation came first, his release conditional on immediate payment of the agreed compensation and formal acknowledgement of his wrongdoing before the assembled divine audience. The war god's compliance appeared reluctant but complete, his desire for freedom overcoming his natural inclination toward continued defiance and confrontation. His public admission of guilt created the legal foundation for Hephaestus's actions, while establishing clear boundaries for future behavior that would be enforced through social pressure and potential divine intervention. Aphrodite's release followed similar protocols, but included additional provisions that reflected her unique position as Hephaestus's wife and the ongoing nature of their marital relationship. Her acknowledgement of wrongdoing needed to address not only the specific adultery that had been exposed, but also her general failure to fulfill the obligations of divine marriage as understood within Olympian society. These admissions created new expectations for her future behaviour, while providing Hephaestus with legal grounds for additional action if similar problems arose. The immediate aftermath of the lovers' release revealed the lasting damage that public exposure had inflicted on their reputations and social standing within Olympian society. Ares found himself subjected to mockery and ridicule that persisted long after the actual incident, with references to his helplessness in the golden net becoming standard elements of divine humour and casual conversation. His military reputation suffered particular damage as other gods questioned whether someone who could be so easily trapped by superior planning possessed the tactical intelligence necessary for effective warfare. The war god's response to this ongoing humiliation involved increased aggression and violence in his professional duties, as he attempted to restore his fearsome reputation through more dramatic displays of martial prowess. His conflicts became bloodier and more destructive, with mortal armies bearing the cost of his wounded pride and desperate need to prove his continued relevance as a force of divine terror. These escalations created new problems for Olympian politics, while demonstrating the broader consequences of personal disputes among the gods. Aphrodite's social rehabilitation proved more complex due to her continued marriage to Hephaestus and the ongoing nature of their domestic arrangements. The goddess of love found herself excluded from many social gatherings, where her presence might create awkwardness or remind observers of recent scandals. Her influence over romantic affairs among both gods and mortals diminished as her own credibility in matters of love and relationships suffered damage from her public exposure as an adulteress and oath-breaker. The marriage itself entered a new phase characterized by formal correctness that masked continued emotional distance and mutual resentment. Hephaestus had achieved his goal of public vindication and established clear consequences for future infidelity, but these victories had not produced the marital happiness and affection he ultimately desired. Aphrodite's compliance with the settlement terms remained technically complete, while demonstrating no genuine change in her feelings toward her husband or commitment to their relationship. The broader implications of the Golden Net incident extended far beyond the immediate participants to influence divine attitudes toward marriage, adultery, and the appropriate responses to domestic disputes. Hephaestus's successful use of superior planning and technical innovation to overcome more traditionally powerful opponents established new models for conflict resolution that emphasized intelligence over strength. His approach demonstrated that even physically disadvantaged gods could defend their interests and maintain their dignity through careful preparation and strategic thinking. The incident also revealed the complex relationship between private behavior and public accountability within Olympian society, where personal actions carried broader implications for social stability and divine authority. The gods' willingness to intervene in what might have remained a private marital dispute reflected their recognition that unresolved conflicts among major deities could threaten the entire cosmic order. The negotiated settlement established precedents for divine mediation in family disputes, while creating expectations about appropriate behavior and consequences that would influence future similar situations. The resolution of the Golden Net scandal marked a turning point in Hephaestus's relationship with procreation and legacy, as the god of the forge began contemplating the creation of life through means more sophisticated than his previous automatons. His experiences with marriage had demonstrated the limitations of conventional divine relationships, while his mastery of metallurgy and artificial life suggested alternative approaches to establishing lineage and perpetuating his influence. The most significant of these experiments would emerge from an unexpected encounter with Athena that combined divine lust with technological innovation to produce one of Athens' most important founding figures. The attempted assault on Athena originated during a period of increased collaboration between the two craft-oriented deities on a major project commissioned by Zeus. The king of the gods had requested the creation of a new type of divine weapon that would combine Athena's strategic wisdom with Hephaestus' manufacturing expertise, requiring extended periods of close cooperation between the virgin goddess and the sexually frustrated craftsman. Their working relationship had developed naturally from their shared interests in technical innovation and practical problem-solving, creating a professional partnership that gradually evolved into something approaching friendship. Athena's visits to Hephaestus' workshop became increasingly frequent as their project progressed, with the goddess spending entire days observing manufacturing processes and contributing strategic insights that improved both efficiency and final product quality. Her presence provided the craftsman with intellectual stimulation that his marriage conspicuously lacked, while her genuine appreciation for his technical skills offered the recognition and respect he had long sought from his divine peers. The goddess's virgin status made their collaboration appear completely appropriate to outside observers, as her legendary chastity seemed to preclude any possibility of romantic or sexual complications. However, Hephaestus' prolonged exposure to Athena's company gradually awakened desires that his unsatisfying marriage had left unfulfilled. The goddess's intelligence and competence provided attractions that transcended mere physical beauty, while her obvious respect for his abilities created emotional connections that his relationship with Aphrodite had never achieved. His growing infatuation remained carefully concealed behind professional courtesy and technical discussions, but the intensity of his feelings increased with each collaborative session until they reached levels that threatened his self-control. The specific incident that triggered his assault occurred during a particularly intensive work session, when Athena had remained in the workshop past her usual departure time to complete crucial calculations for their joint project. The goddess had removed her armour to prevent interference with delicate measurements, revealing the physical form that she normally kept concealed beneath divine battle gear. Her appearance, while less conventionally beautiful than Aphrodite's supernatural allure, possessed an intellectual elegance and natural grace that Hephaestus found more appealing than his wife's calculated seductiveness. The craftsman's attempt to embrace Athena caught the goddess completely off guard, as she had interpreted their relationship as purely professional and had never suspected his growing romantic interest. Her immediate reaction combined outrage at the violation of her virgin status with genuine shock that someone she had trusted as a colleague would attempt such an assault. The goddess's legendary martial skills enabled her to break free from Hephaestus' grasp almost immediately, but not before his arousal had reached the point where physical evidence of his desire stained her clothing. Athena's escape from the workshop marked the end of their professional collaboration and created a scandal that threatened both deities' reputations within Olympian society. The goddess's virgin status made any sexual contact, regardless of its voluntary nature, a serious theological crisis that challenged fundamental assumptions about divine purity and the inviolability of maiden goddesses. Her contamination by Hephaestus' semen, even through attempted rather than completed assault, created pollution that required immediate ritual cleansing and divine intervention to prevent permanent damage to her sacred status. The goddess's response to her contamination involved the immediate removal and disposal of the affected garments, which she cast to the earth below with revulsion and anger that reflected both personal violation and religious outrage. The cloth, saturated with Hephaestus' divine essence and Athena's own sacred power, fell to the Athenian plane where it would undergo transformations that neither deity anticipated. The combination of masculine creative force with feminine wisdom, filtered through Earth's fertile soil, would produce consequences that extended far beyond the immediate crisis of the attempted assault. Gaia, The primordial earth goddess, who had long maintained complex relationships with the younger Olympian generation, received the discarded cloth into her embrace with interest that transcended mere disposal of contaminated materials. The ancient deity recognized the unique properties of the divine essences that had been combined through violence and rejection, seeing potential for creation that the immediate participants had failed to appreciate. Her decision to nurture the combined divine materials reflected both her role as mother of all life and her strategic interest in influencing the development of human civilization. The Earth Goddess's intervention transformed what should have been simple decomposition into a complex gestation process that drew upon her own primordial power while incorporating the divine essences that had been rejected by their original sources. Gaia's womb became the crucible where Hephaestus's creative force merged with Athena's intellectual power under the guidance of Earth's ancient wisdom, producing a hybrid being that would embody characteristics of all three divine influences. The gestation period lasted exactly 9 months, following the natural rhythms of mortal birth while incorporating divine elements that would distinguish the resulting child from purely human offspring. Erichthonius emerged from Gaia's womb as a being that challenged conventional categories of divine, mortal, and monster, his appearance reflecting the complex circumstances of his conception and the multiple divine influences that had shaped his development. His upper body possessed the proportions and beauty associated with divine heritage, while his lower extremities took the form of serpents that connected him to Earth's chthonic powers and Gaia's ancient authority. This hybrid nature made him unsuitable for life among either gods or ordinary mortals, requiring special arrangements that would accommodate his unique characteristics and divine parentage. The child's serpentine lower body reflected deeper theological concepts about the relationship between civilization and natural forces, wisdom and instinct, divine order and primordial chaos. His snake-like tail connected him to the oldest forms of divine power that predated the Olympian system, while his human torso enabled him to participate in civilized society and intellectual pursuits. This dual nature would prove crucial to his future role as a bridge between different worlds and different types of divine authority. Athena's discovery of the child's existence created a complex emotional and theological crisis that required careful navigation to preserve her virgin status while acknowledging her inadvertent role in his creation. The goddess had not participated voluntarily in any sexual act, yet her divine essence had contributed to the production of offspring that bore clear resemblances to her intellectual characteristics and strategic capabilities. Her response to this situation would establish important precedents for divine responsibility and the definition of parenthood within Olympian theology. The goddess's decision to claim Erichthonius as her adopted son represented a sophisticated solution that preserved her technical virginity while accepting responsibility for a child who clearly required divine protection and guidance. Her adoption transformed the circumstances of his birth from scandal to divine mystery, creating mythological frameworks that emphasized her role as protector and educator rather than biological mother. This arrangement satisfied the theological requirements of her virgin status, while providing the child with the divine patronage necessary for survival and development. Athena's care for Erichthonius involved the creation of specialized living arrangements that accommodated his unique physical characteristics, while providing the education and protection appropriate for a being of divine heritage. She commissioned the construction of a special sanctuary within her temple complex, where the child could develop his abilities without exposure to the prejudices and fears that his serpentine appearance might provoke among ordinary mortals. The sanctuary's design incorporated elements that honoured both his divine parentage and his connection to Earth's ancient powers. The educational program that Athena developed for her adopted son emphasized intellectual development and strategic thinking that would prepare him for leadership roles within human society. Her curriculum included instruction in mathematics, engineering, military strategy, and political theory, subjects that reflected her own areas of expertise while building upon the technical inclinations he'd inherited from Hephaestus. The goddess recognized that his unusual heritage would require exceptional capabilities to overcome the social disadvantages created by his monstrous appearance. Erichthonius's training also included extensive instruction in the management of divine power and the responsible use of supernatural abilities that his mixed heritage had provided. His connection to Gaia granted him influence over Earth's fertility and natural processes, while his link to Hephaestus enabled him to understand and manipulate technological systems with intuitive ease. Athena's guidance helped him integrate these diverse capabilities into a coherent approach to leadership that would serve Athens' interests while honouring all aspects of his complex parentage. The child's introduction to Athenian society required careful orchestration to overcome initial resistance and fear generated by his serpentine appearance. Athena employed her influence as the city's patron goddess to prepare the population for their future king, emphasizing his divine heritage and exceptional capabilities while gradually familiarizing them with his unique physical characteristics. Her campaign of preparation included the dissemination of prophecies that portrayed Erichthonius as a divinely chosen leader whose unusual appearance reflected special favor from the gods, rather than monstrous corruption. The acceptance process involved a series of public demonstrations where Erichthonius displayed his remarkable abilities in ways that benefited the entire community. His inherited connection to Earth's powers enabled him to improve agricultural productivity and predict natural disasters, while his technical skills allowed him to introduce innovations in construction and manufacturing that enhanced Athenian prosperity. These practical benefits gradually overcame initial prejudices as the population recognized the advantages of having a ruler whose divine connections provided tangible improvements to their daily lives. Erichthonius's eventual coronation as King of Athens represented the successful integration of divine and mortal authority in ways that established lasting precedents for the relationship between gods and human rulers. His reign would demonstrate the benefits of divine guidance in human governance while creating institutional frameworks that would influence Athenian political development for centuries. The king's unique heritage enabled him to serve as an effective intermediary between divine will and mortal needs, translating celestial wisdom into practical policies that advanced both spiritual and material prosperity. The establishment of the Panathenaic festival represented one of Erichthonius's most significant contributions to Athenian religious and cultural life, creating annual celebrations that honoured Athena while acknowledging the complex circumstances of his own divine parentage. The festival's rituals incorporated elements that recognized all the deities who had contributed to his existence, including Hephaestus's role as unwitting father and Gaia's function as nurturing mother. These celebrations would become central to Athenian identity, while preserving mythological traditions that explained the city's unique relationship with its divine patrons. The festival's most important element involved the presentation of a new peplos to Athena's cult statue, a garment woven by selected Athenian women using techniques that honoured both the goddess's wisdom and Hephaestus's craftsmanship. The peplos served as a tangible reminder of the circumstances surrounding Erichthonius's conception, while transforming those traumatic events into sources of civic pride and religious devotion. The weaving process became a sacred activity that connected mortal women to divine creative forces while producing artwork that rivaled the gods' own productions. Beyond Erichthonius, various mythological traditions attributed additional offspring to Hephaestus through different mothers and circumstances that reflected regional variations in religious belief and local attempts to claim divine patronage for particular communities or bloodlines. These alternative genealogies often contradicted each other while serving specific political or theological purposes that enhanced the prestige of certain families or justified particular religious practices. The diversity of these traditions demonstrates the flexibility of Greek mythological systems and their adaptation to local needs and circumstances. Hephaestus, known as the club-bearer, emerged from traditions that emphasized Hephaestus's more violent and destructive potential, representing aspects of divine craftsmanship that could produce weapons and tools for harmful, rather than beneficial purposes. This son supposedly inherited his father's technical skills, but applied them to banditry and murder rather than constructive creation, using a massive bronze club of his own manufacture to waylay travellers along the roads of the Peloponnese. His eventual defeat by Theseus served mythological functions that contrasted heroic virtue with misdirected divine talent, while demonstrating the importance of using inherited abilities for socially beneficial purposes. The stories surrounding Periphetes reflected broader Greek concerns about the proper use of technical knowledge and the potential for divine gifts to become sources of social disruption when not guided by appropriate moral principles. His characterization as a bandit who used superior craftsmanship for predatory purposes served as a cautionary tale about the relationship between skill and virtue, suggesting that technical ability without ethical guidance could produce monsters rather than heroes. These narratives emphasized the importance of education and moral development in the proper utilization of inherited divine capabilities. Regional traditions in various parts of the Greek world attributed different children to Hephaestus based on local needs for divine patronage and the desire to connect particular bloodlines or communities to Olympian authority. Ardeos appeared in Thracian traditions as a son who inherited his father's association with volcanic forces, while developing additional connections to agricultural fertility and seasonal cycles. His worship involved rituals that combined metalworking techniques with agricultural practices, creating religious observances that honoured both divine craftsmanship and Earth's productive powers. The Kabiroi represented perhaps the most mysterious and theologically complex of Hephaestus's supposed offspring, emerging from religious traditions that predated classical Greek mythology, while being gradually incorporated into Olympian theological systems. These chthonic deities possessed characteristics that connected them to both Hephaestus's technical expertise and more ancient forms of divine power, associated with Earth's depths and the mysteries of death and rebirth. Their worship involved secret initiation rituals that promised spiritual transformation and protection from various forms of harm. The Kabiroi's cult centres on Samothrace and Lemnos, developed elaborate mystery religions that attracted initiates from throughout the Mediterranean world, including prominent political and military leaders who sought the protection and wisdom that these ancient deities supposedly provided. The rituals involved symbolic death and resurrection experiences that connected participants to primordial creative forces while providing practical benefits such as protection from shipwreck and success in military endeavours. These mystery cults demonstrated the continuing influence of pre-Olympian religious traditions and their gradual integration with newer mythological systems. The theological relationship between Hephaestus and the Kabiroi reflected complex syncretistic processes that combined different religious traditions while creating new forms of divine authority that transcended conventional Olympian categories. The craftsman god's association with these ancient deities enhanced his own religious significance, while connecting him to mystery traditions that promised initiates access to hidden knowledge and supernatural protection. This relationship demonstrated the continuing evolution of Greek religious thought and the incorporation of diverse cultural influences into unified mythological systems. The Kabiroi's specific connection to Lemnos created additional layers of meaning that related to Hephaestus's own mythological associations with that island and his rescue by its inhabitants following his expulsion from Olympus. The island's volcanic activity and its population's reputation for metallurgical skill made it a natural centre for worship of deities associated with fire, craftsmanship, and Earth's creative powers. The presence of Kabiric mystery cults on Lemnos reinforced these connections, while providing religious frameworks that honoured both ancient chthonic traditions and newer Olympian innovations. The mystery rituals performed in honor of the Kabiroi incorporated elements that reflected their supposed paternal relationship with Hephaestus, while maintaining distinct characteristics that connected them to older religious traditions. Initiates underwent symbolic experiences of death and rebirth that paralleled the craftsman god's own traumatic expulsion and eventual triumphant return to Olympus, creating psychological frameworks that promise similar transformation and redemption for human participants. These rituals provided models for overcoming adversity and achieving success through persistence and skill development. The divine lineage that extended from Hephaestus through his various offspring created networks of influence and authority that shaped both divine politics and human civilization in ways that transcended his individual contributions to Olympian society. His children carried forward themes of technological innovation, earth connection, and the creative potential of combining different types of divine power, establishing patterns that would influence subsequent generations of both gods and mortals. Their achievements demonstrated the lasting impact of divine craftsmanship and the importance of technical skill in the development of civilized society. The technological innovations associated with Hephaestus's lineage included not only physical inventions and manufacturing techniques, but also social and political innovations that enhanced human capacity for organized cooperation and effective governance. Erichthonius's contributions to Athenian political development established precedents for divine guidance in human affairs, while creating institutional frameworks that balanced different sources of authority and wisdom. His reign demonstrated the benefits of combining divine insight with practical experience in the management of complex social systems. The earth connection that characterized many of Hephaestus's offspring reflected the importance of maintaining relationships with natural forces and primordial powers that predated Olympian authority while remaining relevant to human survival and prosperity. These connections enabled his children to serve as intermediaries between different levels of divine hierarchy, while providing mortals with access to forms of power and knowledge that purely Olympian deities might not possess. The hybrid nature created unique capabilities that transcended conventional categories of divine and mortal authority. The volcanic island of Lemnos emerged as the primary centre of Hephaestus worship throughout the ancient Mediterranean, its unique geological features creating natural conditions that reinforced mythological associations between the craftsman god and terrestrial fire. Located in the northern Aegean Sea, approximately 60 kilometres southwest of the Gallipoli Peninsula, Lemnos possessed volcanic soil rich in iron ore and other metals essential to ancient metallurgy. The island's distinctive reddish earth, coloured by high iron oxide content, created visual connections to the forge fires that defined Hephaestus's divine domain, while providing practical resources that supported thriving metalworking communities. Archaeological excavations conducted throughout the 19th and 20th centuries revealed extensive evidence of Bronze Age settlement patterns that centred around metallurgical activities, with workshops and furnaces distributed across multiple sites that took advantage of natural wind patterns and proximity to ore deposits. The ancient inhabitants developed sophisticated techniques for extracting and processing metals that exceeded contemporary standards in other regions, suggesting divine inspiration, or at minimum exceptional technical knowledge that reinforced religious beliefs about Hephaestus's special relationship with the island. The Lemnian fire ritual represented the most spectacular and theologically significant religious observance associated with Hephaestus worship, occurring annually during the summer months when atmospheric conditions created optimal circumstances for the ceremony's most dramatic elements. The ritual began with the complete extinguishing of all fires throughout the island. Every hearth, forge, and lamp was deliberately quenched in a coordinated effort that left the entire population in darkness for 9 consecutive days. This period of enforced darkness symbolized the primordial chaos that preceded divine creation, while recreating the conditions that existed before Prometheus brought fire to humanity. During the 9 days of darkness, the island's inhabitants maintained strict behavioral protocols that emphasized purification and spiritual preparation for the renewal of divine fire. No metalworking could occur, no cooked food could be consumed, and sexual relations were forbidden as the population engaged in collective fasting and ritual cleansing that prepared them for the sacred fire's return. The economic disruption caused by these restrictions demonstrated the community's complete commitment to religious observance, while creating psychological conditions that heightened anticipation for the ceremony's climactic moment. The renewal of fire occurred through an elaborate ceremony that combined practical fire-making techniques with religious ritual designed to emphasize divine intervention in the restoration of civilization's most essential element. A specially consecrated ship would arrive from Delos carrying new fire that had been kindled at Apollo's sacred altar, its journey across the Aegean serving as a symbolic bridge between different centers of divine authority while ensuring the purity of the flame that would restore light to Lemnos. The ship's arrival created immediate celebration throughout the island, as the population gathered at harbours and coastal settlements to witness the sacred fire's return. The distribution of the new fire followed carefully established protocols that reflected social hierarchies, while ensuring that every household received flames derived from the same divine source. The island's leading families received fire first, followed by craftsmen and metal workers whose occupations connected them most directly to Hephaestus's divine authority. Agricultural families and other residents received fire according to established precedents that reflected both social status and religious significance, creating ceremonial frameworks that reinforce community structure while emphasizing shared dependence on divine favor. The mythological framework surrounding the Lemnian women's massacre provided theological justification for the fire ritual, while connecting the island's religious practices to broader themes of divine justice and social renewal. According to traditional accounts preserved in various classical sources including Apollonius of Rhodes and Valerius Flacius, the women of Lemnos had neglected proper worship of Aphrodite, leading the goddess to curse them with offensive body odour that drove their husbands to seek companionship with Thracian slave women. The resulting domestic discord escalated into systematic violence as the Lemnian women murdered their unfaithful husbands and male relatives in a coordinated massacre that left the island populated entirely by women. This mythological massacre served multiple theological functions that extended beyond simple explanation of ritual practices to address fundamental questions about gender relations, divine justice, and the consequences of religious negligence. The story provided a cautionary tale about the importance of maintaining proper worship, while offering explanations for social customs and religious observances that might otherwise appear arbitrary or excessive. The annual fire renewal became a symbolic recreation of social rebirth following catastrophic destruction, with the restoration of divine flame representing the possibility of redemption and renewal even after the most serious violations of cosmic order. The historical basis for these mythological accounts remains contested among modern scholars, with some arguing that the stories preserve memories of actual social upheavals or military conflicts that devastated the island's male population during the Bronze Age collapse or other periods of regional instability. Others interpret the massacre narrative as purely symbolic, representing seasonal cycles of death and renewal, or gender-based religious practices that emphasized women's roles in maintaining household fires and domestic religious observances. Regardless of their historical accuracy, these stories shaped religious practices and social attitudes throughout the classical period. The integration of the massacre mythology with Hephaestus worship created complex theological frameworks that addressed relationships between divine craftsmanship and social order, technological innovation and moral behaviour, masculine creative power and feminine domestic authority. The gods' association with an island where women had temporarily held complete power provided unusual perspectives on gender roles, while connecting his worship to themes of social reconstruction and the restoration of proper relationships between different segments of the population. Archaeological evidence from Lemnian cult sites reveals sophisticated religious complexes that accommodated both the practical requirements of metallurgical activities and the ceremonial needs of large-scale religious observances. The primary sanctuary at Hephaestus, the island's ancient capital, featured workshops integrated with temple structures in ways that blurred distinctions between sacred and secular activities. Furnaces used for religious ceremonies could also serve practical metalworking functions, while storage areas for religious equipment doubled as repositories for tools and raw materials used in everyday craft production. The sanctuary's architectural layout reflected theological concepts about the relationship between divine and mortal craftsmanship, with spaces designed to facilitate both individual devotion and community-wide celebrations. Central courtyards could accommodate hundreds of worshippers during major festivals, while providing adequate ventilation for forge fires and metalworking activities. Specialized chambers housed religious artifacts and divine images while serving as workshops, where priests and dedicated craftsmen produced votive offerings and ritual objects that demonstrated the highest levels of technical and artistic achievement. Votive offerings discovered at Lemnian sites provide detailed evidence about the types of devotions that characterized Hephaestus worship and the social backgrounds of individuals who sought his divine favor. Bronze figurines depicting the god at work in his forge demonstrate sophisticated casting techniques while revealing popular conceptions of divine craftsmanship and the tools and materials associated with metallurgical activities. Miniature hammers, tongs and anvils served as symbolic offerings that connected mortal craft activities to divine creative power while requesting assistance with specific technical challenges or business ventures. The diversity of offering types reflects the broad social appeal of Hephaestus worship among different economic and occupational groups throughout the ancient Mediterranean. Wealthy merchants contributed elaborate metalwork that demonstrated both their prosperity and their appreciation for the technical skills that had enabled their success. Working craftsmen offered simpler but equally meaningful items that represented significant sacrifices relative to their limited resources, while expressing genuine devotion and professional identification with the divine craftsman. Agricultural offerings found at Lemnian sites indicate that Hephaestus worship extended beyond purely industrial concerns to encompass broader themes of productivity and creative transformation that applied to farming and food production as well as metallurgy. Ceramic vessels containing grain, oil and wine connected the god's creative powers to agricultural fertility, while acknowledging the technological innovations in ploughing, harvesting and food processing that had improved rural productivity. These offerings demonstrate the integration of craft and agricultural activities in ancient economic systems, while revealing popular understanding of divine influence over all forms of productive labour. The presence of weapons among votive offerings reflects both practical concerns about military effectiveness and theological beliefs about the relationship between divine craftsmanship and martial success. Spearheads, sword blades, and armour fragments dedicated at Hephaestus shrines requested divine blessing for military campaigns, while acknowledging the god's role in producing the weapons and equipment that determined battlefield outcomes. These military dedications connected individual warriors and entire armies to divine creative power, while establishing religious frameworks that justified warfare through appeals to divine authority. In Athens, Hephaestus worship developed distinctive characteristics that reflected the city's unique political and economic circumstances, while maintaining connections to broader Mediterranean religious traditions. The god's association with Athena created joint worship patterns that emphasized complementary aspects of divine craftsmanship. Her strategic wisdom balanced his technical innovation, while her military applications complemented his manufacturing expertise. This theological partnership provided religious frameworks that supported Athens' economic development and military expansion, while creating distinctive ritual practices that differentiated Athenian worship from other regional traditions. The Hephaestus festival represented the most significant annual celebration of the gods' worship in Athens, occurring during the summer months when weather conditions favoured outdoor activities and when agricultural and craft work followed seasonal patterns that allowed temporary suspension of normal productive activities. The festival's timing coincided with periods of reduced military activity and increased trade contacts that brought visitors from throughout the Mediterranean to witness Athens's religious observances while conducting commercial business that benefited the local economy. The festival's central event involved a grand procession that began at the Keramikos district, where Athens's pottery workshops and other craft establishments were concentrated, and proceeded through the agora to the Hephaestion temple on Kolonos Agoraios hill. The procession route deliberately connected commercial and religious areas while displaying the products of Athenian craftsmanship to maximum advantage for both divine appreciation and mortal admiration. Participants included representatives from every craft guild and professional association in the city, creating comprehensive displays of technical achievement that demonstrated Athens' economic prosperity and divine favour. The procession's organisation reflected both religious protocols and social hierarchies that governed Athenian civic life, with different groups positioned according to their importance in the city's economic and political systems. Metal workers led the procession due to their direct connection to Hephaestus's primary domain, followed by potters, carpenters, stonemasons, and other craftsmen whose skills contributed to urban prosperity and military capability. Each group carried examples of their finest work along with tools and materials that identified their particular specializations, while demonstrating the diversity of technical knowledge that characterized Athenian society. The joint worship of Hephaestus and Athena during the Hephaestia festival created unique theological frameworks that emphasize cooperation between different types of divine authority, while providing models for human collaboration in complex technical and military enterprises. Ritual activities honored both deities through ceremonies that combined Hephaestus's focus on manufacturing with Athena's emphasis on strategic planning and practical wisdom. These joint observances reinforced Athens' identity as a centre of both military power and economic innovation, while creating religious precedents for the cooperation between different social groups that enabled the city's political and cultural achievements. The festival's competitive elements included contests that tested various craft skills while providing entertainment for spectators and opportunities for individual craftsmen to demonstrate their abilities and gain recognition from potential customers and employers. Metalworking competitions featured challenges that required participants to complete specific projects within limited time periods using standardized tools and materials, creating fair tests of technical skill while producing useful objects that could be dedicated to the god or distributed among the population. These contests encouraged innovation and excellence, while maintaining traditional techniques and quality standards that preserve craft knowledge across generations. Pottery competitions attracted participants from throughout the Greek world due to Athens' reputation for ceramic excellence and the economic importance of pottery production in ancient Mediterranean trade. Contestants worked with local clay and glazes while competing in categories that included both functional vessels and decorative objects that demonstrated artistic as well as technical achievement. The winners received prizes that included both material rewards and professional recognition that could enhance their careers while contributing to Athens' reputation as a centre of ceramic innovation and artistic excellence. The Hephaestion temple itself represented one of the best preserved examples of classical Greek religious architecture, its survival through subsequent historical periods providing detailed evidence about ancient worship practices and architectural techniques. Built during the 5th century BC at the height of Athenian power and prosperity, the temple demonstrated the community's commitment to honouring Hephaestus while creating a permanent monument to divine craftsmanship that would inspire future generations of worshippers and craftsmen. The temple's architectural details incorporated symbolic elements that connected its physical structure to theological concepts about divine craftsmanship and the relationship between mortal and immortal creative activities. The sculptural decorations depicted scenes from Hephaestus's mythology, alongside representations of contemporary craft activities, creating visual narratives that connected mythological events to everyday experiences while emphasizing the continuity between divine and human creative endeavors. The building's proportions followed mathematical principles that reflected both aesthetic preferences and symbolic meanings related to harmony, balance, and the proper relationships between different elements of cosmic order. The temple's interior housed cult statues and religious equipment that facilitated both individual devotions and community-wide ceremonies, with spaces designed to accommodate different types of worship activities while maintaining appropriate levels of sacred atmosphere and divine presence. The main cult statue depicted Hephaestus in his workshop, surrounded by tools and partially completed projects that emphasized his active engagement in creative work rather than static divine authority. This representation encouraged worshippers to view the god as an active participant in ongoing creative processes, rather than a distant figure who required only formal acknowledgement and ritual observance. Mystery cults associated with Hephaestus worship developed most extensively on Samothrace, where religious traditions that predated classical Greek mythology merged with Olympian theological systems to create distinctive initiation practices that promise spiritual transformation and practical benefits to participants. The Samothracian mysteries attracted initiates from throughout the ancient world, including prominent political and military leaders who sought the protection and wisdom that these ancient rites supposedly provided. The cult's international appeal demonstrated the universal relevance of themes associated with divine craftsmanship while creating networks of religious and political connections that transcended regional boundaries. The Samothracian mystery rituals incorporated elements that reflected both Hephaestus's technical expertise and more ancient forms of divine power associated with Earth's creative forces and the cycles of death and renewal that governed natural processes. Initiates underwent symbolic experiences that paralleled the craftsman god's own traumatic expulsion from Olympus and eventual triumphant return, creating psychological frameworks that promise similar transformation and redemption for human participants. These rituals provided models for overcoming adversity and achieving success through persistence, skill development, and proper relationship with divine creative forces. The specific details of Samothracian initiation procedures remained closely guarded secrets throughout antiquity, with initiates bound by oaths that prevented disclosure of ritual content while creating exclusive communities of individuals who shared transformative religious experiences. This secrecy enhanced the mystery's appeal while protecting religious traditions from external interference and maintaining the special status of initiated individuals within broader social and political networks. The mystery cult's influence extended far beyond their immediate participants to shape broader cultural attitudes toward divine power and human potential for spiritual and practical achievement. The archaeological remains at Samothracian cult sites reveal sophisticated religious complexes that accommodated both the practical requirements of mystery, initiation, and the ceremonial needs of large-scale religious gatherings. Underground chambers provided appropriate settings for secret rituals, while surface structures served community-wide celebrations that connected mystery cult activities to broader patterns of religious observance. The integration of different architectural elements reflected theological concepts about the relationship between hidden and revealed aspects of divine truth, while creating physical environments that enhanced the psychological impact of religious experiences. The great gods worshipped at Samothrace included figures that connected Hephaestus to pre-Olympian religious traditions, while maintaining his identity as a member of the younger generation of divine beings. These theological relationships created complex mythological frameworks that acknowledged different sources of divine authority while providing unified approaches to religious practice that satisfied diverse spiritual needs and cultural backgrounds. The mystery cult's success in attracting participants from different ethnic and political groups demonstrated the universal appeal of religious traditions that promised both spiritual transformation and practical benefits through proper relationship with divine creative forces. The influence of Samothracian mystery traditions extended throughout the Hellenistic period as political and military leaders sought initiation into cults that promised both spiritual transformation and practical advantages in worldly affairs. Philip II of Macedon received initiation during his youth, creating connections that would later influence his son Alexander's approach to divine authority and religious policy during his conquests. The mystery cults provided frameworks for understanding divine power that transcended traditional ethnic and political boundaries, making them particularly attractive to rulers who governed diverse populations and needed religious legitimacy that appealed to multiple cultural traditions. Homeric poetry presents Hephaestus as a figure whose divine authority derives primarily from his unmatched technical skills rather than traditional sources of Olympian power, such as control over natural forces or dominion over specific aspects of human experience. In the Iliad, his characterization emphasizes practical competence and professional reliability that contrasts sharply with the emotional volatility and unpredictable behavior exhibited by other major deities. When Thetis approaches him to request armor for Achilles, Homer depicts their interaction as a business transaction between professionals who understand the value of quality craftsmanship and the importance of meeting contractual obligations. The poet's description of Hephaestus's workshop in Book 18 of the Iliad provides the most detailed account of divine manufacturing processes in ancient literature, with technical specifications that reflect genuine understanding of metallurgical techniques and workshop organization. Homer describes the god working at multiple forges simultaneously while directing the activities of golden automatons who assist with various aspects of the production process. The account emphasizes the systematic nature of divine craftsmanship and the careful planning required to produce items that meet the exacting standards expected by immortal customers. The Shield of Achilles episode demonstrates Homer's sophisticated understanding of the relationship between artistic representation and cosmic order, as Hephaestus creates decorative elements that depict the entire world in miniature while maintaining the functional requirements of battlefield equipment. The poet's description moves systematically from the shield's outer rim to its central boss, cataloguing scenes of human activity that encompass the full range of mortal experience from birth to death, peace to war, prosperity to hardship. This comprehensive representation transforms the shield from mere protective equipment into a philosophical statement about the nature of existence and the role of divine craftsmanship in ordering cosmic chaos. Homer's portrayal of Hephaestus's relationship with other Olympians emphasizes his position as a service provider whose technical expertise makes him indispensable despite his physical disabilities and social awkwardness. Unlike gods whose authority derives from fear or worship, Hephaestus maintains his status through the practical necessity of his skills and the consistent quality of his work. This professional competence enables him to interact with other deities as an equal partner in business relationships, while avoiding the political complications that characterize most divine interactions. The poet's treatment of the god's lameness reflects complex attitudes toward disability and divine perfection that reveal tensions within Greek theological thought. Homer presents Hephaestus's physical impairment matter-of-factly without suggesting that it diminishes his divine status or capabilities, yet other characters' reactions indicate that his appearance remains a source of discomfort and social awkwardness. This ambivalent portrayal reflects broader cultural uncertainties about the relationship between physical appearance and inner worth that would continue to influence Greek attitudes toward disability throughout the classical period. In the Odyssey, Hephaestus appears primarily in the context of the Golden Net episode, where Homer's treatment emphasizes the god's intelligence and strategic planning rather than his traditional association with brute force and industrial labor. The poet presents the trap as a masterpiece of engineering that demonstrates sophisticated understanding of both mechanical principles and divine psychology. The net's success validates Hephaestus's claim to respect based on intellectual achievement rather than physical prowess, establishing precedents for alternative forms of divine authority that transcended conventional categories of power and influence. Homer's description of the aftermath of the adultery's exposure reveals the complex social dynamics that governed Olympian society and the ways in which public scandal could reshape relationships between major deities. The poet emphasizes the entertainment value of the spectacle for divine observers while noting the lasting damage to the reputations of both trapped lovers. This treatment reflects sophisticated understanding of how public humiliation functions as a form of social control that enforces behavioral norms through collective pressure rather than formal punishment. The Homeric hymn to Hephaestus, though brief compared to hymns dedicated to other major deities, provides additional insights into religious attitudes toward divine craftsmanship and the proper relationship between technical skill and moral behavior. The hymn emphasizes the god's role in teaching metallurgy to humanity and his contributions to the development of civilized society through technological innovation. This didactic function positions Hephaestus as a culture hero whose divine authority derives from his beneficial impact on human development rather than his position within Olympian hierarchy. Aeschylus incorporated Hephaestus into his dramatic works as a figure whose technical expertise enables both creation and destruction, reflecting the playwright's interest in the moral ambiguity of technological power and its potential for both beneficial and harmful applications. In Prometheus Bound, Hephaestus appears as the reluctant executioner who must chain Prometheus to the Caucasian cliff as punishment for stealing fire from the gods. The dramatist presents this role as deeply conflicted, with Hephaestus expressing sympathy for the Titan's humanitarian motivations, while remaining bound by divine command to carry out Zeus's orders. The playwright's characterization emphasizes the god's position as a tool of divine authority, who possesses the technical skills necessary to implement Zeus's will, but lacks the political power to influence policy decisions. This portrayal reflects broader themes in Aeschylean drama about the relationship between individual conscience and institutional authority, with Hephaestus serving as a figure who must choose between personal ethics and professional obligations. His ultimate compliance with Zeus's commands demonstrates the limitations of technical expertise in confronting political power, while highlighting the moral costs of participating in unjust systems. Aeschylus's treatment of the Prometheus episode also explores the relationship between different types of divine authority and the ways in which technical skills can be co-opted to serve political purposes that contradict their original humanitarian intentions. Hephaestus's craftsmanship, which normally serves creative and beneficial functions, becomes an instrument of torture and oppression when directed by Zeus's authoritarian impulses. This transformation illustrates the playwright's concerns about the potential for technological capabilities to be perverted by corrupt leadership, while maintaining their essential neutrality as tools that reflect the moral character of their users. The dialogue between Hephaestus and his assistants Kratos and Bia during the chaining scene reveals the god's internal struggle between professional duty and personal sympathy, with the craftsman attempting to minimize Prometheus's suffering, while fulfilling the technical requirements of his assignment. Aeschylus uses this interaction to explore themes of moral responsibility and the extent to which individuals can be held accountable for actions performed under compulsion. The scene demonstrates the playwright's sophisticated understanding of ethical complexity and his refusal to provide simple answers to questions about guilt and innocence in morally ambiguous situations. Sophocles employed Hephaestus as a minor but significant character in several dramatic works where his technical expertise provides solutions to practical problems, while his divine status enables intervention in human affairs that would be impossible for mortal characters. In these appearances, the god typically functions as a deus ex machina, whose supernatural abilities resolve plot complications while maintaining dramatic credibility through his established mythological associations with helpful intervention in mortal crises. The playwright's characterization emphasizes Hephaestus's reliability and professional competence rather than the emotional volatility that characterizes many divine figures in Greek drama. This consistent portrayal reflects Sophoclean dramatic principles that favor psychological realism and character development over spectacular divine interventions, with Hephaestus serving as a stabilizing presence whose actions follow logical patterns based on established personality traits and mythological precedents. Sophocles' treatment of the god's relationship with mortal characters demonstrates sophisticated understanding of the theological boundaries that separate divine and human spheres of activity, while allowing for meaningful interaction between immortal and mortal beings. Hephaestus typically appears when technical problems require supernatural solutions, but his interventions follow natural laws and logical principles rather than arbitrary divine whim. This approach maintains dramatic credibility while preserving religious reverence for divine power and wisdom. Aristophanes incorporated Hephaestus into his comedic works as a figure whose physical disabilities and social awkwardness provided opportunities for humour, while his divine status protected him from the more savage ridicule that the playwright directed toward purely mortal targets. The god's lameness and his unsuccessful marriage to Aphrodite became sources of running jokes that played upon audience familiarity with mythological traditions, while avoiding the religious offence that might result from more serious mockery of divine authority. The comedian's treatment emphasizes the contrast between Hephaestus's impressive professional achievements and his failures in social and romantic situations, creating humour through the juxtaposition of divine technical competence with very human emotional inadequacies. This approach reflects Aristophanic comedic techniques that find humour in the gap between public reputation and private reality, while maintaining sufficient respect for religious traditions to avoid charges of impiety or blasphemy. Aristophanes' references to the Golden Net episode demonstrate the incident's establishment as a standard element of popular culture that could be referenced without extensive explanation, while providing opportunities for sexual humour that appealed to the playwright's predominantly male audience. These references typically emphasize the cleverness of Hephaestus's revenge rather than the moral implications of adultery, reflecting comedic priorities that favor entertainment over ethical instruction. The playwright's portrayal of Hephaestus's relationship with other Olympians emphasizes his position as an outsider whose technical skills provide access to divine society without full social acceptance. This characterization creates comedic situations where the god's professional competence contrasts with his social ineptitude, generating humour through the recognition of familiar human experiences projected onto divine characters. The approach demonstrates Aristophanes' skill at finding universal themes that transcend the specific circumstances of mythological narratives. Greek pottery from the 6th and 5th centuries BC provides extensive visual evidence for popular conceptions of Hephaestus and the iconographic traditions that shaped artistic representations of the divine craftsman. Black figure and red figure vases typically depict him as a bearded, mature male with muscular build that reflects his association with heavy physical labour, while his lameness appears through various artistic conventions that indicate physical disability without compromising the dignity expected in divine representation. Early artistic representations emphasize the god's professional identity through the inclusion of craftsmen's tools and workshop equipment that identify his divine domain, while demonstrating the technical knowledge of artists who created these images. Hammers, tongs, anvils, and bellows appear as standard iconographic elements that connect visual representations to literary descriptions while providing information about actual metallurgical practices and workshop organisation. These technical details suggest that many artists possess direct familiarity with craft production or consulted with practicing metalworkers to ensure accuracy in their depictions. The evolution of Hephaestus's artistic representation reflects changing attitudes toward physical disability and divine authority throughout the classical period. Earlier images tend to minimize or disguise his lameness through compositional techniques that focus attention on his upper body strength and professional competence, while later representations become more explicit about his physical limitations without suggesting that they diminish his divine status or capabilities. This progression indicates growing acceptance of disability as compatible with divine authority and social respect. Vase paintings depicting the return of Hephaestus to Olympus demonstrate the episode's popularity as a subject for artistic treatment, while revealing different approaches to representing divine politics and family relationships. These scenes typically show Dionysus leading the reluctant craftsman back to the celestial realm, with various compositional arrangements that emphasize different aspects of the narrative. Some versions focus on the diplomatic aspects of the negotiation, while others emphasize the comedic elements of divine drunkenness and social reconciliation. The artistic treatment of Hephaestus's workshop scenes provides valuable information about ancient manufacturing techniques and workplace organization, while demonstrating the integration of divine and mortal craft activities in popular imagination. These depictions typically show the god working alongside mortal assistants or divine automatons, creating collaborative environments that reflect actual workshop practices while maintaining the supernatural elements that distinguish divine from human craftsmanship. The accuracy of technical details suggests that artists consulted with practicing craftsmen or possessed direct experience with metallurgical processes. Sculptural representations of Hephaestus reveal different approaches to depicting divine disability in three-dimensional art forms that required more explicit treatment of physical characteristics than the stylized conventions of vase painting allowed. Classical sculptures typically present him as a powerful figure whose muscular development reflects his association with heavy labour, while incorporating subtle indications of lameness that acknowledge mythological traditions without compromising artistic ideals of divine beauty and strength. The most famous sculptural representation, the cult statue created by Alcamenes for the Hephaestion temple in Athens, established iconographic standards that influenced subsequent artistic treatments throughout the Hellenistic and Roman periods. Although the original statue no longer survives, ancient descriptions and later copies indicate that it presented Hephaestus as a mature craftsman whose physical imperfections were balanced by evident strength and professional competence. This approach created a model for representing disability that acknowledged limitations while emphasizing capabilities and achievements. Relief sculptures on temple pediments and architectural friezes incorporated Hephaestus into larger narrative compositions that depicted mythological events while demonstrating his relationships with other divine figures. These ensemble pieces required artists to balance individual characterization with overall compositional harmony, leading to representations that emphasized his distinctive attributes while maintaining visual coherence with surrounding figures. The challenge of integrating a physically disabled god into idealized divine assemblages led to innovative artistic solutions that influence broader approaches to representing diversity within unified compositions. Roman adaptation of Greek Hephaestus traditions through the identification with their indigenous deity, Vulcan created new mythological frameworks that combined Olympian characteristics with distinctively Italian religious concepts and cultural values. This syncretistic process preserved essential elements of Greek mythology while adapting them to Roman political and social needs, creating hybrid traditions that maintained continuity with classical sources while developing new emphases and interpretations that reflected Roman priorities and perspectives. Vulcan's association with destructive volcanic activity provided Roman religion with a divine figure who embodied both creative and destructive aspects of fire, creating theological frameworks that addressed natural disasters and military applications of incendiary weapons. This dual nature expanded beyond the primarily constructive focus of Greek Hephaestus traditions to encompass the violent and unpredictable aspects of volcanic eruptions and urban fires that pose constant threats to Roman urban populations. The god's worship involved rituals designed to prevent destructive fires while maintaining his beneficial associations with metallurgy and craftsmanship. The Roman festival of Vulcanalia, celebrated annually on August 23rd during the hottest and most fire-prone period of the Mediterranean summer, demonstrated the adaptation of Greek religious traditions to address specifically Roman concerns about urban fire prevention and public safety. The festival's rituals involved the sacrifice of red-coloured animals whose blood was believed to appease the god's destructive impulses while maintaining his cooperation in beneficial craft activities. These observances reflected Roman practical approaches to religious practice that emphasized tangible benefits and measurable results rather than purely spiritual or philosophical considerations. Roman artistic representations of Vulcan incorporated iconographic elements derived from Greek Hephaestus traditions, while adding distinctively Roman symbols and attributes that reflected imperial political ideology and cultural values. The god frequently appears in association with military equipment and weapons that emphasize his role in supporting Roman military supremacy, while architectural settings often feature distinctively Roman building types and decorative elements that connect divine craftsmanship to imperial construction projects and urban development programs. The integration of Vulcan worship into Roman state religion created official frameworks for honoring divine craftsmanship, while supporting imperial economic policies that promoted technological innovation and industrial development. Temple construction and religious festivals provided opportunities for displaying Roman technical achievements while creating religious justifications for imperial expansion and cultural superiority claims. These adaptations transformed Greek mythological traditions into instruments of Roman political propaganda while preserving their essential religious and cultural functions. The enduring fascination with Hephaestus across millennia stems from his embodiment of fundamental paradoxes that continue to resonate in contemporary discussions about technology, creativity, and human potential. Modern scholarly interpretation has increasingly focused on the profound symbolism embedded within his divine disability, recognizing that his lameness represents far more than a simple physical limitation or narrative device designed to distinguish him from other Olympian deities. Contemporary academic analysis reveals that Hephaestus's physical imperfection serves as a complex metaphor for the relationship between limitation and innovation, suggesting that creative excellence often emerges precisely from the need to overcome obstacles that would defeat less determined individuals. The concept of divine disability challenges fundamental assumptions about perfection and authority that permeate both ancient and modern cultural systems. In Greek religious thought, physical beauty traditionally served as an external manifestation of inner virtue and divine favour, creating theological frameworks where appearance directly correlated with moral and spiritual worth. Hephaestus's lameness disrupted these neat categories by demonstrating that supreme creative ability could coexist with physical imperfection, forcing ancient audiences to confront the limitations of aesthetic-based value systems, while opening possibilities for alternative definitions of excellence and divine authority. Modern disability studies scholars have identified Hephaestus as one of the earliest examples in Western literature of what contemporary theory terms compensatory excellence, the phenomenon where individuals develop extraordinary capabilities in specific areas to offset limitations in others. His unmatched craftsmanship emerges not despite his physical disability, but because of it, as his unique challenges drove him to develop technological solutions and creative approaches that transcended conventional limitations. This relationship between constraint and innovation reflects broader patterns observed in human creativity, where limitations often serve as catalysts for breakthrough achievements rather than insurmountable obstacles. The psychological dimensions of Hephaestus's character reveal sophisticated ancient understanding of trauma's potential to generate both destructive and creative responses. His violent expulsion from Olympus created profound emotional wounds that could have resulted in permanent bitterness and withdrawal from society. Instead, his response involved channeling traumatic energy into productive activities that ultimately transformed him from rejected outcast into indispensable member of divine society. This transformation demonstrates resilience patterns that modern psychology recognizes post-traumatic growth, where individuals emerge from devastating experiences with enhanced capabilities and deeper understanding of their own potential. The craftsman god's relationship with his physical limitations also reflects ancient Greek concepts about the nature of excellence and the proper response to adversity. Rather than attempting to conceal or minimize his disability, Hephaestus developed alternative approaches to mobility and manipulation that enhanced rather than compromised his effectiveness. His use of golden automatons as assistants represents early conceptualization of what contemporary technology terms assistive devices, tools designed to extend human capabilities beyond natural limitations while maintaining individual agency and creative control. Fire's dual nature as both creative and destructive force finds its most complete mythological expression in Hephaestus, whose mastery over this fundamental element embodies humanity's complex relationship with technological power. Ancient Greek understanding of fire encompassed far more than simple combustion. It represented the transformative energy that enabled civilization's development while carrying constant potential for catastrophic destruction. Prometheus's theft of fire from the gods symbolized humanity's acquisition of technological capability, but Hephaestus's mastery of that same element demonstrated the wisdom and skill required to harness dangerous forces for beneficial purposes. The god's forge represents the archetypal space where raw materials undergo transformation into useful objects through the application of controlled violence in extreme conditions. This process mirrors broader patterns of technological development, where natural resources must be subjected to intensive processing before they can serve human needs. The metallurgical techniques associated with Hephaestus worship involved deliberate destruction of original material forms to create new substances with enhanced properties. Ore became metal, metal became tools, tools enabled further technological advancement in endless cycles of creative destruction. Modern analysis recognizes striking parallels between ancient fire symbolism and contemporary discussions about artificial intelligence and automation. Just as fire provided humanity with unprecedented power while requiring constant vigilance to prevent destructive accidents, modern technological capabilities offer transformative potential while carrying risks that could fundamentally alter or threaten human civilization. Hephaestus's role as master craftsman who creates artificial beings capable of independent action anticipates contemporary concerns about the development of autonomous systems that might eventually operate beyond human control or understanding. The golden automatons described in Homeric poetry represent perhaps the earliest conceptualization in Western literature of artificial intelligence and robotic assistance. These mechanical servants possess capabilities that exceeded those of living beings in specific areas while remaining bound by their programming and unable to transcend the limitations imposed by their creator. Their existence raises questions about consciousness, agency, and the relationship between artificial and natural intelligence that remains central to contemporary technological debates. Hephaestus's creation of Pandora provides another lens through which to examine ancient attitudes toward artificial life and the ethical implications of creating beings designed to serve specific purposes. The first woman's construction involved collaboration among multiple deities, each contributing specialized knowledge to produce a being that combined artificial and natural elements in ways that challenged conventional categories of life and consciousness. Her subsequent role in releasing suffering into the world demonstrates ancient recognition that technological creation carries unintended consequences that may only become apparent after implementation. The craftsman god's influence on subsequent mythological traditions extends far beyond Greek culture to encompass divine craftsman figures throughout world mythology, revealing universal human fascination with the relationship between technical skill and supernatural power. Norse mythology's Wayland the Smith shares numerous characteristics with Hephaestus, including physical disability, exceptional craftsmanship, and complex relationships with other divine figures that reflect tensions between different types of authority and social value. Both figures demonstrate how metallurgical knowledge provided pathways to divine status in societies where technical innovation carried profound religious and political significance. Celtic traditions preserve similar divine craftsman figures whose abilities transcend normal human limitations while remaining connected to earthly materials and practical applications. The Irish god Goibniu possessed skills in metalworking that enabled him to create weapons and tools with supernatural properties, while his association with healing and hospitality expanded his influence beyond purely technical domains. These parallels suggest that the archetype of the divine craftsman represents a fundamental human recognition of creativity's sacred dimensions and technology's potential to bridge mortal and immortal realms. Hindu mythology's Vishvakarma serves as divine architect and craftsman, whose creations include the god's weapons and the physical structures of the universe itself. His role combines technical expertise with cosmic authority in ways that parallel Hephaestus's position within Greek mythology, while reflecting different cultural values and religious priorities. The persistence of divine craftsman figures across diverse cultural traditions indicates universal human recognition of creativity's transcendent potential and the special status accorded to individuals who possess exceptional technical abilities. Modern fantasy literature has drawn extensively on Hephaestus traditions to create characters and narratives that explore contemporary concerns about technology, creativity, and the relationship between physical limitation and exceptional achievement. J.R.R. Tolkien's dwarves inherit many characteristics from ancient divine craftsman traditions, including exceptional metallurgical skills, complex relationships with other fantasy races, and underground workshops where they create objects of extraordinary beauty and power. Their portrayal reflects both admiration for technical excellence and recognition of the social tensions that can arise when specialized knowledge creates power imbalances within diverse communities. Contemporary science fiction has adapted Hephaestus themes to explore questions about artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and the ethical implications of creating life forms designed to serve human purposes. Isaac Asimov's robot stories examine relationships between creators and created beings that parallel ancient myths about divine craftsmen and their artificial servants, while addressing modern concerns about consciousness, free will, and the responsibilities that accompany technological power. These narratives demonstrate the continued relevance of mythological frameworks for understanding contemporary technological challenges. Contemporary discussions about artificial intelligence frequently invoke Hephaestus themes when examining the relationship between human creativity and machine capability. The god's golden automatons serve as archetypal examples of artificial beings designed to assist rather than replace their creators, providing models for beneficial human-AI collaboration while highlighting potential risks associated with creating entities that might eventually operate beyond human control or understanding. These mythological precedents offer frameworks for thinking about AI development that emphasize complementary rather than competitive relationships between human and artificial intelligence. The environmental implications of technological development find mythological expression in Hephaestus's association with both creative and destructive fire, reflecting ancient recognition that the same forces enabling human progress could also threaten natural systems and social stability. Contemporary climate change discussions often reference Prometheus's fire theft as a metaphor for humanity's acquisition of fossil fuel technologies that provided unprecedented power while creating environmental consequences that threaten civilization's survival. Hephaestus's mastery of controlled combustion offers alternative models that emphasize sustainable approaches to technological development and resource utilization. Modern manufacturing industries continue to honor Hephaestus through corporate symbolism and professional organizations that invoke his name and iconography to represent excellence in technical achievement and commitment to quality craftsmanship. Engineering societies and trade associations frequently adopt hammer and anvil symbols derived from his mythological associations, while technical schools and vocational training programs invoke his patronage to inspire students pursuing careers in manufacturing and construction trades. The god's association with volcanic activity has gained renewed relevance as contemporary society grapples with natural disasters and climate change that threaten technological infrastructure and urban populations. Volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and extreme weather events demonstrate nature's power to disrupt human technological systems while revealing the fragility of civilizations built on complex technological foundations. Hephaestus's dual nature as creator and destroyer provides mythological frameworks for understanding these challenges, while emphasizing the need for technological approaches that work with rather than against natural forces. Archaeological discoveries continue to reveal new information about ancient Hephaestus worship and its relationship to technological development in classical civilizations. Recent excavations at metallurgical sites throughout the Mediterranean have uncovered evidence of sophisticated manufacturing techniques that exceeded previously understood capabilities of ancient craftsmen, suggesting that religious devotion to divine craftsmanship may have inspired technological innovations that contributed to cultural and economic advancement. These findings demonstrate the practical benefits of religious traditions that honored technical excellence while encouraging innovation and skill development. As humanity stands at the threshold of unprecedented technological capabilities involving artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, nanotechnology, and other transformative innovations, the figure of Hephaestus provides both inspiration and cautionary guidance for navigating the challenges ahead. His mythology demonstrates that technological power carries both creative potential and destructive risks that require wisdom, skill, and ethical commitment to manage responsibly. The craftsman god's legacy reminds us that true mastery involves not merely the ability to create, but the wisdom to understand the consequences of creation and the responsibility to use powerful capabilities for beneficial rather than harmful purposes. The enduring relevance of Hephaestus in contemporary culture reflects humanity's continued struggle to balance technological advancement with social responsibility, individual creativity with collective welfare, and the drive for innovation with respect for natural limitations. His mythology provides frameworks for understanding these challenges, while offering hope that even the most significant obstacles can be overcome through persistence, creativity, and commitment to excellence. As we continue to develop technologies that approach the mythological powers once attributed only to gods, the wisdom embedded in ancient stories about divine craftsmanship becomes increasingly valuable for navigating the complex ethical and practical challenges that accompany unprecedented human capabilities. In the end, Hephaestus stands as a testament to the transformative power of creativity, channeled through adversity, the potential for technology to serve human flourishing, and the enduring human capacity to find meaning and purpose through the act of making. His forge burns eternal in the human imagination, reminding each generation that the greatest creations emerge not from perfection, but from the determination to transcend limitations and create something beautiful, useful, and lasting from the raw materials of existence.